My name is Bree. When I went to high school, during my senior year, early on in the first semester, I remember noticing this one new kid in our school. I will call him Dave for this story. I had never seen him at our school before, and I had a history class with him. For the most part, that's all I knew of him. Beyond that, I didn't really notice him much at all. The next semester, I didn't have any classes with Dave. It was pretty early on in that second semester that one of my friends told me something shortly after I had gotten to school one day. She told me that Dave had been posting some really weird and borderline creepy Snapchat stories of me. Nobody in my friend group was friends with Dave on Snapchat, but apparently my friend had heard from a mutual friend about it. Somebody who was friends with Dave on Snapchat had seen his stories and found them really odd. When I asked for examples, I was told that he had occasionally taken photos of me in class or in the hallway without my knowledge. Other times, he would post random pictures and mention me for whatever reason. To me, this did seem pretty strange, and I felt like I should tell Dave to stop. But I knew this might be really awkward to do, or he might deny it altogether. I thought about it for a little while, but I never really saw Dave anymore anyways. I didn't have any classes with him anymore. Plus, I never saw him in the hallways in between classes either. Our school was pretty big, with about 2,000 students total. Over time, I just kind of ignored it. I figured that maybe he was a bit of a creep, or maybe he had a crush on me, but if he didn't see me anymore, he would get over it. Roughly 2 weeks after finding out about this, I was told once again by a friend that Dave had posted a weird story about me. My friend had actually befriended Dave on Snapchat to see his stories. He posted a picture of my car in the student parking lot, saying the caption, "My favorite girl's car." Obviously, I found this really weird, and I knew that I needed to ask Dave to stop. Unfortunately, I could never seem to find Dave in the hallways, and I didn't want to go out looking for him. I decided that I would just add Dave on Snapchat, just for the purpose of asking him to stop posting weird things about me. So that day, when I got home from school, I asked my friend for Dave's username, and she gave it to me. Once I added Dave, he added me back, and he immediately snapped me saying hi. I snapped him back, telling him that I was made aware of the strange things that he was posting about me, and that I needed him to stop doing so. He opened my snap, but didn't reply. Then, I deleted him. A couple of hours later, when I was in my bedroom, I suddenly heard a loud noise against my window. I had been at my desk finishing homework, which was about 5 feet from the window. I looked over to it, and there was another loud bang. This time, the window broke, and glass shattered everywhere. I jumped back and saw Dave standing right outside the window. He then started cursing at me. I was terrified. I already knew he did some creepy things, but this was really crossing the line. Then he came closer and started to crawl through the broken window. I jumped up and ran out of the room. My parents were home, but on the other side of the house in the living room. I ran over to them and was frantically screaming that somebody had broken in. Dave did not leave my bedroom, and after we called the police, he must have left because when they got there, he was gone. Thankfully, I knew exactly who he was, and he was found that same night. It was a bad idea for me to add him on Snapchat because my location was on, and I guess Dave could see exactly where I lived then. Since then, I've turned my location off, and I'm much more careful of who I add on Snapchat. Nothing else crazy like this has happened to me, though. This story happened back when I was in college. Like many college guys, I used Snapchat quite a bit. I had probably over 1,000 Snapchat friends and would communicate with most of my friends through the app. I got to know a lot of my classmates better through snapping them or having snap streaks. Anyways, to get to the story, it all started one night when I was studying in my bedroom. I lived in a house with 2 roommates who were some good friends that I had made my freshman year. I had my own bedroom upstairs in the house, and so did each of my roommates. When I study, I tend to get distracted by my phone quite a bit, and when I looked at it on my desk, I saw somebody had added me on Snapchat. It was a girl named Kaylee. Her username didn't have a last name in it, just a bunch of numbers, so I wasn't quite sure who she was, but I figured that she went to my school, which is pretty large. I added her back, and I snapped her a picture of my face saying hi. She snapped me back, and she appeared to be around my age. We snapped back and forth for the rest of the night, and she told me that she also went to my university. The next night, I found myself home alone and bored. Both of my roommates went to their intramural sports games, and I had stayed home with an assignment, but I finished much earlier than I thought I would. I was still snapping Kaylee, and I told her about my situation. That's when she asked if I wanted her to come over. I really hadn't expected that, and I would have expected her to want to meet in a public place, or at least snap a few days before meeting, but I was cool with it. Kaylee asked me for my address, and I gave it to her. Both me and her were both on the snap map, and it appeared that she lived on the other side of campus. Kaylee snapped me that she was leaving and would be at my place shortly. I went down and attempted to clean up the house a little bit. About 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I walked downstairs, expecting to see Kaylee, but instead saw some guy. There was a guy with a jacket and winter hat standing at the front door. I was really confused. I opened up the door crack and asked what the guy wanted. He told me that he was Kaylee's friend and had given her a ride to my house. He told me that Kaylee was in the car down the street, but he wanted to make sure it was safe and I wasn't some crazy person. He told me that he was just trying to look out for her and asked if he could come inside and look around. I was really weirded out by this. It caught me by surprise, and I told the guy to give me a second, and then I closed the door. I checked the snap map, and it showed Kaylee as being literally right outside of my front door, right where the guy was standing. I knew this wasn't right. I snapped Kaylee, asking who the guy was. She began typing quickly, and as she was typing, I looked outside and saw the guy typing on his phone. Eventually, she sent me a chat, and it said basically the same thing that the guy had said. The guy then knocked on the door again. I yelled from the other side for the guy to just leave, and I wasn't falling for his tricks. I then watched him walk away, and thankfully, he left. About 20 minutes later, I got a snap from Kaylee. I opened it to see a picture of the guy flipping me off. I opened it, but didn't respond. A short time later, I got another snap. This one was of the same guy saying, "You still fell for a fake girl, you effing idiot." I then blocked the account. He was right in the fact that I had fallen for a fake girl, but I had seen pictures of her and wondered how he had done it. After some research though, I learned that the guy probably got some type of app that allows you to send pictures of snaps of whatever you want without it appearing as an uploaded photo. It's complicated, but not too hard to figure out. All the guy needed was multiple selfies of the same girl. I had noticed that her selfie style was a little different, but I looked past it. This whole thing was kind of embarrassing for me, but I'm just happy to say that I'm okay. I'm a female and in college. This all happened about 6 months ago. I've had a Snapchat since I was in middle school and have more friends on that app than I can even count. I get added by new people all the time, and I usually accept the people who add me, but that has since changed. I would post stories occasionally when I was with friends or whatever. One time, a guy screenshotted my story who I didn't know. I didn't really think much of it though, until it happened again. When it did, I clicked on his profile, and I really had no idea who the guy was or when we had become Snapchat friends. He didn't have a Bitmoji, so I had no idea what he looked like. I searched his name on Instagram and Facebook, but it was a pretty common name and brought back no useful results. After that, I moved on. The next time I posted a story, he screenshotted it again though. This time, I sent him a message and asked him why he always screenshotted my stories. He opened up my Snapchat a very short time later and replied with a picture. I opened it up and was extremely creeped out. It was a picture of his wall that had countless photos of me taped to it. I saw many of the photos that I had posted on Instagram and all of my recent Snapchat stories. There were also some pictures from my Facebook and basically any photo of me that was online. But it got worse. There were some photos of me on his wall that I didn't remember being taken, like just pictures of me walking. I took a screenshot of the picture that he sent me, and then I blocked his account. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Then, I made my Instagram and Facebook accounts private. But that's when I realized maybe this guy was already one of my followers or friends. I searched his name on Facebook, and sure enough, we were friends. I showed his profile to my parents and told them about what had happened. That's when I learned something very creepy. They told me that he was one of our neighbors and lived just down the street. We live in a pretty large neighborhood, and I definitely didn't know all of our neighbors. I only know a few. I guess my dad had helped him snowblow his driveway a few years back. I couldn't believe it. My dad went over to talk to the guy, but he denied everything. I blocked the guy on all social media, and I hope I never see him again.
It's been a few months since my life has gone back to normal. Currently, I don't feel safe anywhere. I used to dorm at my college, but I had to go back home during the second semester due to strange occurrences happening there. I don't plan on dorming anytime soon. It might not be the smartest thing to share this since it's still under investigation, but maybe it will make people more cautious of social networking. It sure has made me wary of trusting strangers online again. November of last year was when the messages first appeared. Ever heard of Snapchat before? For those of you who don't know what Snapchat is, it's an app that lets you send picture messages to your friends, but that only lasts for a couple of seconds. Once those seconds are up, the picture disappears forever, meaning you can never see them again. You can only send pictures you take at the moment, and they can only be seen for the few seconds of the time that's given. You can also draw and write text on the pictures. You can even send videos. I never really knew about Snapchat up until I was introduced to it by my friends. They practically encouraged me to download it, and being the weak-willed person I am, I gave in to peer pressure. It seemed kind of fun at first. I was taking pictures and sending them like crazy. Most of the time, I just took pictures of myself making the goofiest faces and putting random letters for text. I also went out of my way to take pictures of the funniest things. I remember taking a picture of this dude's butt crack while he bent down to tie his shoes. Yeah, it was sick, but downright hilarious to me. There were a lot of people who added me as a friend on Snapchat. Most of them came from Facebook or the contact list on my phone. This also included some people I didn't know too well, but they still sent me pictures either way, and it was actually pretty nice. I guess Snapchat made it easier to break the ice with people I randomly added or haven't seen in a while. One day in November, someone called weare1_forever added me on Snapchat. At the moment, I didn't think too much of it. I figured it was just another one of my Facebook friends. Instantly, the first message this person sent me was a paper with sharpied handwriting on it and a heart drawn underneath it. It read, "Hey cutie, how are you?" Once 4 seconds had passed, the message had disappeared. I was flattered by the fact that whoever this person was referred to me as cutie. I'm guessing it was probably a girl flirting with me a little bit. I sent her back a picture of me with my eyebrow raised and a smirk on my face. After that, I added the text, "I'm doing good. You think I'm a cutie?" and then sent it to her for 5 seconds. About a few minutes later, I got another picture from her. The picture was of a teddy bear carrying a red heart with a white backdrop. The text read, "You are on my top 5. Right away, I wanted to know who this person was. For the next couple of days that we messaged each other, she never sent me a picture of herself. For some reason, she wouldn't even tell me her name. I kept pushing her to send me a picture, but she always made excuses or sent stupidly drawn stick figures instead. With that, I believed that she was either really ugly or really shy, and I was hoping for the latter. I decided to let it go, thinking she must really be into me if she's that secretive with revealing her face and even her name. One day while I was in the library, I checked Snapchat real quick while I was taking a break from typing a paper for one of my courses. Sure enough, there was a message from weare1_forever. As soon as my finger tapped it open, I almost jumped out of my seat. She sent me a picture of a person, the first time she's ever done so. But that's not what got me all bothered about this picture. I knew that the picture of this person definitely was not her. In fact, it was a guy sitting on a couch, white shirt, blue sweatpants, looking straight into a laptop, bookshelves in the background. The text read, "I see you." I looked behind and around me. There was no one who seemed suspicious, just a bunch of college students in their own little worlds. Still, I didn't want to read too much into it. After all, why psych myself out for something that seemed like harmless flirting? I sent her a picture of me, started sending pictures of only me and nothing else. She rarely added text on them anymore. It was for most of the time. Some of my friends were texting me to join them for lunch, but I was in no mood to come out and show myself. First message, I couldn't believe my own eyes, and even thought for that second that I was going insane. I wanted to scream. Immediately I regretted my decision of ever opening that message. Just thinking about it gave me chills alone. At first, I couldn't make out what the picture was. It seemed dark, but she must have enabled the flash option because there was a bright light illuminating the subject of the picture. Even though the picture was only for a second, I was able to make out what it was in the second and third picture, and by the 20th picture, my eyes confirmed it was someone lying in bed. It made my heart beat unnervingly fast. Those were the most horrifying seconds of my life. As I kept opening these messages, they were the same pictures of someone sleeping. The more recent messages became closer and closer views of the person. The closer they were, the more they confirmed my fears about the person in the picture. And the videos. Oh God, the fucking videos. They may have been only 5 videos, but they showed uncomfortable close-ups of that person's face in the glowing flashlight. And then there was that typical noisy, silent audio in the background, and my own sleeping face. It broke me down as I immediately dialed my college's police department. I told them someone broke into my room last night, and that I was being stalked by someone I didn't know who was also sending me pictures of myself. I tried to explain as much as I could, but they couldn't even understand what I was saying because I sounded like a complete mess. They came over to check up on my dorm room, observe any forcible entry that could have taken place, and even question my roommate for an hour. I showed them my Snapchat to prove the multiple messages the person was sending me. Unfortunately, they couldn't retrieve them and see the actual pictures. I told my parents about it a week later. They wanted to pick me up as soon as possible, even though finals were coming up. After I was finished though, I went back home and the messages had stopped for a while. I didn't see anything from We Are One Forever for the second semester of college. The police are still trying to find out the perpetrator and are currently trying to contact the makers of Snapchat to retrieve those terrifying pictures. At that time, my life was going back to normal. And yeah, I was still using Snapchat for the innocent fun of it. The last days of the semester, though, became a different story altogether. It was a typical Friday and I was home alone, watching TV and chowing down on snacks. I just completed the last of my finals, so I was treating myself after all that stress from college and especially from that slightly traumatizing situation. But that all changed once my phone began to vibrate. This whole wave of dizziness took over me as I read what was on the screen. We Are One Forever sent you a message. I was conflicted with what to do at the moment, and maybe I shouldn't have opened the message. Maybe I should have just deleted Snapchat from my phone and saved myself the trouble, because when I did open the message, I was clearly met with the image of my house in broad daylight. Not just my whole house, but specifically the view of the kitchen window. The picture only lasted for 5 seconds, and it was kinda hard to see due to its grainy quality. Yet it was noticeable enough to detect my own self sitting by the table, eating my cereal in the morning, looking outside the window at what I remembered to be particularly nothing at all.
A couple years ago, when I was 15, I was really big into Snapchat. I was kind of obsessed with building my Snap score, so I would add random friends and accept random requests to do so. It was pretty weird, I know, but being that young, my Snap score was a number that mattered to me for whatever reason. Now, a lot of my friends from school and I have this group chat. I remember it was a Saturday when one of them mentioned we should go to the mall. A lot of them agreed, and I wanted to as well, but realized I didn't have a ride. So I posted it on my story if anyone was able to pick me up and take me. I was more so expecting someone I knew to respond, like my cousin or something. But I got a Snapchat back from this guy I'd never talked to before. Or at least his Bitmoji was a guy. But either way, I didn't know who it was. It said he was my friend on Snapchat, but we had never had a single conversation or even shared any pictures back and forth before. He texted me something about how he was bored and had nothing better to do. I remember responding to him, asking if he even lived in the same state. It turns out he did, but the town he said he lived in was at least a 2-hour drive from me. I told him not to worry about it, and I didn't want him to drive 2 hours just to take me to the mall. But he quickly responded saying why not. At this point, the whole conversation felt off to me, but he insisted. I finally ended up agreeing. I told him he could come pick me up, but only if he was willing to send me a picture of himself. I was just trying to be cautious. A couple minutes later, he sent me a snap. I opened it, just to see some 30-year-old guy looking back at me. The guy had on a really dirty hat, smiling at the camera, though like half of his teeth were missing. The caption on the snap said he was on his way. I sat there for a second thinking it over in my head. How did the guy know where to pick me up? He didn't even ask for my address. That's when my heart dropped, realizing I had my snap map on, meaning that anyone I had as a friend on the app could easily find my address. I panicked and quickly responded to the guy apologizing, saying I actually had a closer friend willing to take me. Now, obviously that wasn't true, but the fact that this guy was willing to drive 2 hours to pick someone up he had never even met before, just from their location on the snap map alone, gave me an off vibe. Plus, the guy looked insanely creepy. Definitely not someone I'd feel comfortable being around. The guy opened the snap a couple minutes later, but never responded. As far as I know, he never showed up. Though, I live in a cul-de-sac, and usually we wouldn't get any cars passing by our house. But I swear, for at least the next few days, there was this same black SUV that would constantly drive by. Whether that was related or not, I don't know. Though, about a month later, I was on Facebook scrolling through my feed. I passed a news story that had one of those attachments, meaning it was sourced on a different website. I almost always scroll past those things, but I couldn't help but stop for this one. There, on my Facebook feed, I could clearly see a picture of that guy from Snapchat. There was no doubt in my mind it was the same guy. The headline of the news story read that he was arrested for attempted murder. This whole experience makes me think I dodged a major bullet by trusting my gut and not accepting a ride from the guy. The whole situation shook me up for a while, and nowadays I try to be a lot smarter and only allow people I trust to see me on the snap map. I'm a female, and when I was a sophomore in high school, I took a lot of different classes. One of them I don't think I'll ever forget. It was a history class, and the regular teacher for the class had another job on top of teaching. And because of this, we would often get a substitute teacher for the class. It was always the same guy. I would say he was at least in his mid-50s. Nothing ever struck me as odd about him, since if I'm being honest, I rarely even ever paid attention in that class. That was until one day. I was in the middle of working on a project he assigned, but every time I looked up from my paper, he was just staring at me. Every time I would look at him, he wouldn't even break eye contact and try to play it off either. One of the times I looked up, I noticed he had his phone pointed in my direction. It looked like he was taking pictures of me. I of course was creeped out, but didn't say anything in case I was wrong. Anyway, a few weeks later, somehow, which I still don't know how to this day, the guy found my Snapchat username and added me. I knew it was him too, as he had his full name on the account. I didn't know what to do, but I still regret the decision I made. Knowing he had an influence on my grade, I ended up adding him back. A few minutes later, he sent me a snap saying hey. He had his face in it and everything. At this point, I knew something wasn't right. I took a screenshot of the snap and left him on read. He quickly followed up with another snap, this time a black screen with a question mark as the caption. I again left him on read and forgot about the whole situation. Over the next few weeks, there were multiple occasions where I would check the snap map just to see him not far away. And this would happen anywhere too, not just at school. I would be at the mall with my friends, for example, and see he just so happened to be at the same mall. Or even sometimes at school, when I knew for a fact he didn't work that day. Though, overall, for a solid month, nothing but those supposed coincidences took place regarding the whole situation. But of course, a few days later, I would get a random message from him. I could tell it was a chat this time, and not a regular snap. I opened it, and I was absolutely horrified. He sent around 50 pictures of me in pretty much any situation. Some were of me at school, but others, confirming my suspicion about him following me on the snap map, were of me not on school campus. Obviously, I left him on read, screenshotted everything, and blocked him. I instantly told my parents, and they notified both the school and the police. It's been 2 years since the situation. I'm a senior now, and ever since he sent the pictures, I'd never seen him again. I can only assume he was fired, as we actually got another substitute teacher who was really nice. Overall, the whole situation was really disturbing. The fact that I had someone following me around and taking pictures of me just based on my location on the snap map for a good month of my life absolutely terrifies me. I deleted Snapchat shortly after the whole experience, and like I said, I haven't seen the guy since, so I'm not entirely sure whatever ended up happening to him.
Hi, Joel. This is my first time writing to you, and since this is a very sensitive topic in my old hometown, I'd rather remain anonymous if that's okay with you. I had a friend back in elementary school, not my closest friend, but we moved in the same circles, and at one point she invited me over to her house for a sleepover. I was only too happy to accept. It sounded fun. But little did I know it was a night that would have some seriously far-reaching implications. So this friend of mine, we'll call her Annie, lived with her mom and stepdad. They seemed like nice enough folks, and their place was nice enough, but I guess a lot of us come to learn as we grow older, appearances can be deceptive. On the night of the sleepover, her mom wasn't due home until later in the evening. This meant that we were in the care of my friend's stepdad, and because of our bedtime, we weren't likely to see her mom until the following morning. This was no big deal to me at all, but it was to my friend, who kept bringing it up at odd moments while we were playing. It also became increasingly obvious that she didn't really like her stepdad at all that much, which I guess is about par for the course for some children of divorce, so I didn't really read into it all that much. But then came bedtime. We got into our PJs, brushed our teeth, and went back to Annie's bedroom to climb into bed. I asked if she had a nightlight or anything and went to turn off the bedroom's main light, but she stopped me, telling me that her stepdad would be up soon to check on us. Only when he made sure that we were tucked in bed would we be allowed to turn the nightlight on and talk for a while. It seemed like a weirdly strict way of doing things, but I figured that I better just respect their systems, so I lay down on the blow-up mattress that they'd put down for me and got tucked in. I remember talking to Annie about something. I can't remember what exactly, but the conversation took this sudden turn when, out of nowhere, she said, "I'm real glad you're here tonight, Sarah. Thank you for sleeping over." I guess from how it looks on paper, that sounds like a pretty wholesome moment, right? But that just makes me wish y'all could actually hear Annie saying those words, because the way her voice sounded gave them a distinctly unsettling feel. It was almost like my presence was going to prevent something bad from happening, and at the time, I figured that bad thing was just Annie being lonely on a Friday night. She also wasn't the most popular girl around, and I think it played on her insecurities, so it made sense that our friendship meant a lot to her. But in truth, there was a whole other reason she was glad I was there. I remember me and Annie hearing her stepdad walking up the stairs and her swiftly laying back in bed with the covers up to her chin. Now, looking back on it, there was a kind of military precision to it. Annie seemed nervous, like she was focused to pass some kind of inspection, which is exactly what I assumed was going on. I figured if her stepdad was that strict, I'd better do her a solid and just act likewise, so I did. I lay back down on the blow-up mattress and pulled the covers up to my chin. Annie's stepdad then walked into the room, and instead of carrying himself like some drill sergeant, he seemed perfectly warm and friendly, just like he'd been all evening. Then he walks over to Annie's bed to take a seat on the edge and leans in to give her a goodnight kiss. Only instead of a quick peck on the cheek or forehead before standing up again, he lingers a little too long after the kiss itself. It didn't strike me as being wrong or anything, just weird. Then, as he started to whisper something to Annie, she said aloud, "I want to talk to Sarah." I remember thinking, "So talk to me, I'm right here." Like the whole situation just seemed really off to me for some reason, and I couldn't figure out why. I knew different families did things differently. I guess I was just too naive to recognize something that would have seemed obvious if I'd seen it today. So as I'd said, Annie had thrown out some vague ultimatum, which signaled to her stepdad to leave. He shifted a little, looked back at me for a moment with a smile, then turned back to start whispering something to Annie again. She cuts him off even more assertively that time, saying, "Dad, I want to talk to Sarah, please." There was a brief pause, and then he said, "Okay, sweetie." And after that, he finally left the room. Like I said, I knew that I just witnessed something significant, I just didn't know what. But the vibe in the room afterwards was very intense. Annie stayed quiet for a long time, Then when she finally spoke, she said that same heartwarming, turned creepy kind of thing. "I'm glad you're here tonight, Sarah. Thank you for sleeping over." I didn't sleep over at Annie's house again. I think she knew that her stepdad had kinda creeped me out that night, but we stayed friends for the remainder of elementary school, and she even came over to play for a few times during the summer after graduation. Sadly, our friendship was basically doomed because we were headed for different middle schools once summer break was over. We kept in touch for a little while, but by the end of that first year, we had all but drifted apart completely. Over the next 2 years or so, I saw Annie around town a number of times. We were always happy to see each other, but the final few times that we bumped into one another, Annie had started to look increasingly unwell. She didn't look like she was eating or sleeping very much, but insisted that she was fine when I asked her. I just wished her all the best, then carried on shopping for track shoes with my mom. About 4 months go by, and I don't see or hear anything of Annie. And then, probably the most infamous crime in our town's recent history occurred. My mom broke the news to me, how a man had killed his wife, his kid, and then took his own life, before setting fire to the family home. I grew up in a real quiet mountain town, maybe only 3,000 people altogether, the kind of place where someone running a stoplight was gossip-worthy. Nothing ever happened there, so for something so awful to happen out of the blue, it rocked people to their very foundations. When Mom told me, I remember feeling awful for the wife and kid while wondering what the hell had gone so badly wrong in a man to make him something so unspeakable. But that wasn't the worst part. My mom knew who the family was. The kid that got killed was Annie, and her killer was her own stepfather. I was devastated, beyond devastated really, and it hit me harder because I felt like I'd known that he was bad. He acted all friendly and warm on the outside, but what I saw in Annie's room that night was a glimpse of a man he really was. Like I said, someone older might have been able to piece it together, but I just didn't have the emotional toolkit, so to speak, to do so, and in my mind, that meant Annie's death kind of felt partially my fault. I couldn't say that, though. I just bottled it all up, knowing that even if I had said something, nothing would have happened. It's not illegal to be a little strict or weird. That was my thinking anyway, but as I came to learn, that's not quite how the law works when it comes to kids. I should have said something. That's the moral of the story, really, and it's just as much a warning to others as it is a lesson to myself. If I'd have raised the alarm, even if it was voicing some minor concerns about the way Annie's stepdad acted with her at night, that would have gotten the ball rolling, meaning there was a good chance someone would have gotten around to asking him a few questions. And if that certain someone had been a 3-letter agency, and they'd looked through his computer, they'd have found a Pandora's box of vile, indecent images. Annie's stepdad was abusing her. He had been for years, and he's been documenting it too. Neighbors heard a whole bunch of shouting just before the murders and were right about to call the sheriff when they heard the first few shots. They said it sounded vicious, the argument, and that they were pretty sure someone was smashing things in between yells. It's not 100% clear, but people generally agree that the fight occurred after Annie's mom found the pictures or videos or whatever it was on her husband's computer. The way I imagine it is that all the smashing was either him smashing phones or him trying to stop Annie's mom from getting to one so she could call the cops. Then, when Annie's stepdad realized that there was nothing he could do or say to get Annie's mom to stop or calm down, he grabbed his gun and shot her, Annie, and then himself, after trying to destroy the evidence. He probably would have been successful if their neighbors hadn't heard the gunshots, because the cops that arrived on scene quickly summoned the fire department who put out the blaze and preserved all the digital evidence in the process. The whole thing didn't come out for months and months afterwards, which I guess was a deliberate decision to try to keep people from freaking out too hard. But all it really did was divide all the grief and outrage into 2 parts. Hearing that Annie was being abused reignited the whole thing and had this big black cloud hanging over the town that never really went away. Me and my own family ended up moving out of town about 2 years later, and I did my final couple years of high school someplace else. When people figured out where I'd moved from, they kept asking if I'd known the girl who had been murdered by her stepdad. I used to lie and tell them I didn't, but every time they asked, I'd have to find an excuse to take a quiet moment in order to fight back the tears. I felt horrifically guilty for a long, long time, too, and it took a therapist to get me to understand that it wasn't my fault. But even so, I know there's a small part of me that will always feel partially responsible. It's all just a case of keeping that part's voice, the one that tells me it's all my fault, as quiet as possible.
Sometimes you need a bit of fun in your life, and certain people can definitely make it brighter. I'm talking about friends, close friends. This story's been in the back of my mind for about 2 years now, and it's one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life that I really want to forget. It occasionally pops into my mind, and it still gives me the shivers to this day. It was the end of another school week, a Friday, and as a lot of us teenagers do, we decided to have a sleepover on the weekend. My friends agreed with me, and we happily walked home, talking about what we should do the next day and where we should go, and all that stuff that you'd expect to talk about. One of my other friends said that we should have a sleepover at his place. I'm not revealing their real names for privacy reasons, so for this story I'll call them X and L. And in case you're confused, it was X that said he wanted us to sleep over at his place. I quietly walked home as I and L split up to go to our own houses to pack up our belongings for the sleepover. I grabbed out my bathroom equipment, sleeping bag, and fresh clothes, and all the other stuff you would need for a sleepover. Once I was finished packing my bag, I had called both X and L on our group chat, and told X that I had packed and I'd asked my parents if I was allowed to come, and told them they said yes, and L said the same thing as me. We were all excited, and X said that he'll be waiting at the park down outside his house to meet, since the park was only 2 houses down from his place. I casually walked to the park, which was approximately 10 minutes away. Right as we got there, I saw X and L already at the park. I gave them both a wave and we all walked to X's house. We all got inside and made ourselves comfortable with our sleeping bags in the living room, because X's room was, well, a tad bit tiny. I think that the time was somewhere around 12:30 a.m. I remember it raining ever so slightly. We were all laughing and giggling about certain events that had happened at school that day, but I guess that isn't really relevant to the story. I told them that we should probably all go to sleep since it was extremely late and that I was really tired. Elle then replied, "Alright then, I guess it is a pretty shitty night after all." We had all started laughing at that response, and it eventually got to the point where we started talking less and less, and then eventually falling asleep from boredom. However, I didn't really fall asleep that night. I was rolling over in my bag and just trying to get into a comfortable position to sleep in, but had no luck falling asleep. I had my eyes wide open, staring at the blank ceiling. I looked at both X and L, who were both pretty wiped out into slumber. I got out of my sleeping bag as quietly as I possibly could, and then went into the kitchen to get a drink. But after I had my drink of water, I had heard some type of noise coming from a wall. I didn't really make it out at first, and I kinda had a difficult time trying to figure out what it was, and it was coming from the living room. I carefully went into the living room, and then tried my best not to step on Elle. I was standing in the middle of the room, trying my best to find out where the hell the sound was coming from. Okay, to give you a bit of context, if you enter the front door of the house, the living room is in the first room that you enter, and the left side of the living room where you enter is a giant window. Well, the tapping sound was coming from that window. My heart was starting to speed up now, but what was the only logical option, you may ask? To look through the window. I told myself to just go up to the window and see what it was, so I proceeded to do so. I stopped. There was something else. The windows were closed by blinds. I leaned my ear closer to the window. Now, along with the tapping, I could also hear breathing. I could barely just hear it over the rain. Very slow breathing. I couldn't say anything. I very slowly backed away from the window. I frantically woke up both X and L in a panic. They both said to me, "What? What is it?" in a grainy, tired voice. I told them to shush themselves and to listen. However, the tapping and breathing soon stopped. Elle then said, "Dude, I don't hear a thing." I told them what I heard, but they didn't believe me. I was getting mad. But then Elle suggested, "Why don't you just go outside and check?" I immediately said something along the lines of, "Fine, I'll go out there. In fact, why don't you both come out with me just to be sure?" I opened the door quietly and motioned my friends to come outside with me. We got to the window outside the house, and nothing. There was nothing there. X said to me, "I told you, I knew there wasn't going to be anything there." We both talked about it for a bit outside, and X said I was crazy, but the story doesn't end there. Out of the blue, Elle nervously said, "Wait, who's that guy over there?" We all looked, and there was a dark silhouette that was just standing still a few houses down the street. He was probably about 5'5", and he was wearing a raincoat from what I remember. My friends both looked at me, knowing that I wasn't crazy. The guy was just staring at us, not moving a muscle, but he then started laughing in a sort of sinister kind of way. Within that moment, I said softly, "Go for the backyard gate, right now, do it." The guy continued to stare at us while we both slid slowly to the gate, which was very close. Suddenly the guy just full-on sprinted right toward us without warning. My life was in slow motion. I dashed for the gate. All of us got in, and I was actually the last one to get in, and then I locked the gate. The guy ran into the gate with such force, but the gate didn't budge. The gate and fence were really high, and he couldn't possibly get over it. He then started banging and screaming at the gate, yelling things like, "Come on out here and I'll kill you, you dumb teenagers." And I'll honestly never forget that sentence. We made a run for it to the back door of the house and woke X's dad up. He bolted straight outside and said the guy made a run for it and was already halfway down the street. He chased after him, screaming for him to get back here. X's dad called the police straight away. They arrived a little while later with cops. 3 searched the area while 1 stopped to talk to me about it. The 3 cops found nothing except for a long and sharp kitchen knife that was dropped outside the front lawn. I shuddered. One of the policemen asked me if I knew what he looked like, but I couldn't make anything out other than he was somewhere around 5'5" and wearing a raincoat. He wasn't seen again after that, and he hasn't come back. But the police that day said they found dirty boot marks right outside the front door. But the really creepy part about the boot marks outside the door is that apparently that door had a peephole, and that peephole could make you see through both ways. Plus X's house is old, and that guy was possibly spying on us through it. Moral of the story is be very careful during the night, because anything can happen if you're not careful.
Sleepovers have always been those special activities with friends and exist to have the purpose of a fun time. However, based on this story, it's clear that not all sleepovers end up being fun or exciting. This happened at my best friend's house a few years ago when we were still in middle school. For privacy reasons, I'll call her Megan. Megan was around my age and attended the same classes in school as me. Ever since then, we've become great friends where we mostly hung out just about every weekend. She was one of those friends who you could always count on and was just there to brighten your day. Anyway, this happened during winter break of 2018. Megan had invited me over to her house for a sleepover. Before I said yes, I had to get permission from my parents, and with them knowing Megan and I were best friends, they thankfully agreed. That night, my mom had drove me over to her house to drop me off. Megan had come from a very wealthy family, so she lived in a really nice house. You might as well consider it as a mansion. This would make the sleepover 10 times better, seeing as there would be more things to do. I got to her house with all of my clothes and utilities packed. Both Megan and her mom had greeted me, and we both went up to Megan's room where we watched a few movies and played some video games. About a couple hours into the stay, her mom had told us that she had been going out to dinner with a friend and wouldn't be back until late. Megan and I were both pretty mature for our age and told her we'd be fine until she got back. Her mom had given us $20 to order pizza, and with that, she went on her way. Not too long after, Megan had asked if I wanted to play hide and seek. Now, most people think that hide and seek is for younger children, but it comes back when you hit middle school. I agreed to it, and we had agreed that Megan would hide and I'd be the one seeking. Seeing as this house was huge, we decided we only play on the second floor to not make the game too hard. I gave her a good minute to hide while I said the all too common phrase, "Ready or not, here I come." Even though I was seeking on one floor, it was still pretty big with about 10 plus rooms to search. I start with Megan's room while looking under her bed, her closet, and even behind the door. However, she wasn't there, and I continue searching for her. I'd say I looked through several rooms by now, and that was when I noticed that one of the closets in the hallway had been slightly opened. I completely forgot about this as it was small and was a place most people wouldn't think to look. I casually walk over to the closet, and that's when I saw the glimpse of an eye peering in, staring right at me. At this point, I knew it was Megan, but I tried to make it seem like I didn't notice, as I wanted to give Megan a sort of scare when finding her. With that said, I opened the closet door, expecting to scare Megan, but instead saw this man staring back at me. His hair was a mess, and I saw craze straight through his eyes. But what really struck me the most was how he looked at me. It was almost as if he were guilty, as if he wasn't supposed to be caught. I scream at the top of my lungs as he runs past me down the stairs and out of the house. At that point, Megan had come to me and asked what was wrong, to which I told her that there was someone in the house and to call the cops. Thankfully, there was a police station down the road, so it didn't take long for an officer to arrive. After a thorough investigation, they had claimed that the man had probably found a way in due to the extreme weather. However, the man didn't get far. They had found him out in the backyard hiding behind one of the sheds. After all, it was snowing out and just needed someplace warm. Megan's parents decided to not press charges on him, but wanted a restraining order. Basically, he couldn't come near the house within 500 feet. The sleepover had been called off that night as my parents no longer felt comfortable. I remember my mom giving Megan and her family a bit of criticism, telling them how her mom could be so irresponsible leaving children alone. I wasn't invited back to their house again until my parents felt comfortable. Megan and I are still friends till this day and now work at a local supermarket. I'm still unsure as to what happened with that man, but I just hope he's getting the help he needs. This happened to a couple friends and I in our senior year of high school back in 2014. Back in high school, my friends and I were that dynamic trio you'd commonly see walking around campus that many people talk about. Anyway, this took place during the final months of high school, and because of this, we decided to do a sleepover to just relive our fun times. It was a Saturday night, and at one point during the sleepover, we had just finished a movie not knowing what else to do. Now, this was also around the time where social media had begun to blow up. One of the social media apps that started gaining popularity quickly was Instagram, which eventually led to major trends. One of these trends was playing with an Ouija board in an attempt to contact spirits and other entities. There had been thousands of these videos uploaded to YouTube and Instagram about people attempting to connect with spirits. In fact, the trend got so popular that there were even tutorials on how to actually make contact. Being the naive and dumb teenagers we were, we had all looked at each other just knowing we had to do it. Thankfully, the parents of the friend hosting the sleepover just so happened to own a really old Ouija board that had been passed down from her family for years. She had claimed that it was 100% authentic and most likely worked, seeing how old it was. If anything, this was a plus, as it would only add to the creepiness. We did some research online and found an article that described how to correctly set up an Ouija board. This involved some candles and a dark, quiet room. Once we got the supplies, we set the board down, lit the candles, and turned off all of the lights. For the first few seconds, nothing had happened, but that was until we felt the planchette slowly move to yes. We all look at each other, trying to figure out which one of us was moving it. However, we all denied and said that it was moving by itself. For some reason, one of my friends asked if it can somehow prove that there was something with us. All of a sudden, the craziest thing happens when we hear the sound of a toy piano being played in the other room. This instantly gave us a good scare, to which I then asked it a more serious question. Doing this was probably the stupidest decision I've ever made, and I still regret it till this day. I stupidly asked the board when I would die. With my hands on the planchette, it slowly moves to the letters TENSECONDS. 10 seconds. At this point, we all start staring at each other while laughing, thinking that one of us had to have done that. However, just about 15 seconds or so later, my phone starts ringing with the label emergency call. It was from my dad. I picked it up and was met with him screaming on the other end saying she's dead. She, meaning my mom. Apparently, they were on their way home from a dinner party when the car swerved off and got shoved into a boat trailer. My mom died instantly on impact while my dad only suffered from minor bruises. This incident has left me devastated for years, as I truly believe that this wasn't some coincidence.
It was around 11 at night and I had just finished working out at the gym. I went to the grocery store to pick up some food for the next couple of days. While at the grocery store, I decided to get $120 cash back, money that I owed my mom, and unbeknownst to me, as I left the grocery store, money that I came so close to losing. Instead of going straight home, I decided to go for a little drive. I just got my car not long ago and the novelty of driving stick hasn't worn off yet. After about a half hour of driving around the city, I decided it's about time to head home. As I pass a gas station on the edge of town, but close to my house, I decide that now's a good time as any to pull in and fuel up. I pull in, and I'm the only one at the gas station. I'm in an industrial business part of town, the edge like I said, so there isn't much around. There's an empty lot that's without light beside the gas station, and I notice an SUV sitting there about 100 to 200 meters away, but I don't think much of it. I get out and start pumping gas when I notice a woman come around the corner and walk straight towards me. As soon as I notice her, a shiver ran down my spine. I instinctively locked my car. She walked towards me quickly, hands in her pockets, staring at me pretty intensely the whole time.
"I got in a fight with my boyfriend and he left me here. Can you give me a ride to my mom's house?"
she said casually in a raspy smoker's voice. Another chill ran down my spine as she repeated the question, word for word almost, in the same raspy voice. I have to pump gas first," I said to her, keeping my eyes on her the whole time. She walked around to the passenger side door. Beside me, fuel port is on the passenger side, and grabs onto the door handle.
"Can you unlock your car? I'm cold. I've been here a while."
"I have to pay for the gas," I said, deciding to cut the gas pumping short, I walked inside and talked to the guy behind the counter. I told him the girl outside was kind of suspicious and I didn't know her. He just kind of shrugged, and I could tell he wasn't interested in getting involved, so I walked out. I figured she was high or something, but I would find a way to just get her to leave me alone. As I walk out, the SUV that I had mentioned earlier started up. I watched the driver maneuver himself so he could just drive out the exit. He stopped, engine still rolling. He was still like 100 meters away.
Can you open the door now? I'm really cold.
So many alarm bells were going off in my head already. First, she just looked sort of sketchy. She was dressed well enough, but her face was pretty rough. She was pretty covered in makeup, but it didn't hide a nasty-looking sore on her lip. Her sunken eyes were dull, bloodshot, and just dead-looking. Second, she didn't seem like a damsel in distress, not at all. She didn't seem upset, and she spoke without much emotion.
No, that's not my problem. I need to go home,
I said to her, as firmly as I could.
Come on, you're driving me home, right?
I can't. I have to get home right now. Reaching for my phone, I realized I had left it in the car.
I'm cold. I've been out here for hours,
she shouts, pretty angrily for someone who's asking a favor, I thought. Then I noticed her look at the SUV. I started cluing into what was going on and raised my voice a bit.
That's not my problem.
I'm at the driver's side door now.
I'm freezing. You said you'd drive me home. That's not my problem.
I started raising my voice. She started raising hers. We weren't yelling, but it was getting a little heated. We went back and forth like that for a couple of minutes. My mind was racing. I thought about losing my car and about getting stabbed or shot, about getting robbed for the $120 I had in my wallet. I just lost it on her.
Get the back. You do not know who I am. Get the back right now.
I think I caught her off guard or something because she stepped back right away.
You better get out of here right now then,
she said, walking backwards. I was out of fight mode and into flight mode. I watched her until she got a decent distance away, noticing she was walking sort of towards the SUV. I didn't watch for much longer. I hopped in my car and peeled the fuck out of there. I turned into a random subdivision, making sure I wasn't being followed. I called the cops and they said they'd send a car, but there wasn't much that they could do because there was no real crime committed. But I did the right thing, and she was most likely bait for some kind of robbery. I drove home as quick as I could. About 10 years ago, I worked for a short time at a small gas station close by to my house. Both of my kids had started school, and we always needed extra money. I was about 26 or 27 and had not ever really worked anywhere before, but it was fun. We stayed a little busy throughout the day, as there were 3 factories very close by, and would get a lot of our traffic from the employees there, especially at shift change times. One weekday mid-morning, I was working by myself, which was unusual, but my manager, who usually worked days with me, was out sick. No big deal. It was no more than I could handle. There were people in and out all morning, and nothing out of the ordinary was happening, until a transfer truck pulls in and parks to the side of the building. We didn't carry diesel fuel, but it wasn't unusual to have big trucks pull in for drinks, bathroom, or whatever. The driver walks in. Tall guy, not unattractive, but a little creepy looking. He had a huge refillable coffee mug and asked me if there was fresh coffee and if he could fill up his mug. I told him no problem. He fills his mug and comes up to pay and starts chit-chatting. He told me that he had a delivery for one of the factories up the street and asked what would be the best way to get in there, so I told him. No big deal, happens all the time. He then started telling me how he was from Arkansas and that after he dropped his load, he was headed back home for a few days. I was just politely nodding my head. Then he asked me if there was a restroom. I told him yes and pointed to where it was, but did not come out from behind the counter. He starts trying to chat with me again without going to the restroom. He asked me if I was working alone, and that's when all kinds of signals started going off in my head. I told him my coworker had to run an errand and would be back right away. He winds up staying in there for about 20 minutes, trying to small talk, and asked me at least 6 or 7 times where the restroom is, During this time, customers were coming in and out, and when someone would come in, he would walk around the store, kind of behind the shelves. At this point, I'm trying to stay calm and figure out what I need to do to get him the hell out of here. I looked out at the gas pumps and saw a man from one of the factories up the street on a forklift filling it with gas. When he comes in, I was trying to start a conversation and ask him stupid questions to get him to look at my face so I could gesture where creepy guy was standing behind the potato chips. He didn't catch the hint until he walked out of the door and turned back to look at me, and I mouthed to him, "Help me." He turns around and comes back in, and by this time creepy guy had come out from behind the potato chips. Forklift guy asks me if I am okay, and I tell him no. He asks if I needed help, and I say yes. All of this being said very low where creepy guy cannot hear. All of a sudden, forklift guy runs around the chips, slams creepy guy into the Coke cooler, telling him that the lady wants him to leave and to get the fuck out. Creepy guy runs out, jumps into his truck, and hightails it out of there, while forklift guy stays with me until I call the police, and they get there. I make a report, gave my best description I could, called a coworker to come and stay with me, and the police and forklift guy leave. About an hour later, one of the cops come back in to tell me that they caught the guy speeding on the highway leading out of town. He not only had an empty trailer on the back of his truck, he had not been to drop off his load, he didn't even leave in that direction, and no way did he have time to get to the factory, unload, and get back out to where he was pulled over in that amount of time. But he also had a pistol that had been reported stolen in Alabama, and had just been released from prison where he had served 2 years for rape and was wanted in Missouri for not reporting into his probation officer after being released. I have no clue why he was in a transfer truck or what the hell he was doing in small-town Georgia, but he clearly was making his rounds through the Southeast.
A few years back, I was on a road trip by myself. I was driving across about 3 different states to go home and visit my parents and some other family. I had made the trip a couple of times before since I had started living where I was. The drive took a total of about 7 hours, so I would do it all in one day, but it was still a really long drive. On the day that I left, I was able to get out of work a couple of hours early, which was nice. The drive went well for the most part. I stopped for gas a few times, and food as well. At about 9 p.m., I found myself around 2 hours away from my parents' house. My car was running low on gas, and I was running low on energy, so I pulled off the freeway for what would probably be my final stop. After I got off the freeway, I drove down a quieter road for maybe a mile before seeing a gas station. It was a 7-Eleven, and I pulled in and drove up to a pump. The gas station was very quiet, and nobody else was there that I was aware of. After filling my tank, I started walking inside to get an energy drink or something. When I was headed towards the door, I noticed that there was a man kind of standing in a darker area on the side of the building. I went inside and went to the drinks. I found something with some caffeine and then went over and paid for it. Nobody else was inside the store other than the employee. After leaving, I was heading back to my car, which was still at the pump. When I got inside, I cracked open my drink and took a few sips. I was casually looking around and drinking when I noticed the man who had been standing at the side of the building. He was suddenly walking over to me, and the way he was walking was really aggressive. Based on the fact that a random guy who had been standing around the side of a gas station was rushing towards me, I decided to leave. I quickly started up my car and began driving away. When I pulled out, the man was probably within 20 feet of me. I was happy to get out of there, but I noticed the man start running to the back of the parking lot of the gas station, where a smaller, old-looking red car had been parked. I had assumed that car was the employee's. I saw the man get in, and I was now driving down off the road, headed back for the freeway. The guy started speeding away, almost recklessly. He caught up with me rather quickly, and I hadn't been driving slow either, but I wasn't going to risk getting a speeding ticket. Now I was really concerned. I had no clue who this guy was. I was not aware of any reason at all for him to follow me. I soon merged back onto the freeway and started driving down it. The guy behind me was right on my tail the entire time. The freeway was pretty quiet, but there were a couple of other cars and trucks here and there. As I drove, I switched lanes a few times. The guy behind me would always copy me and do exactly the same. The following distance that he maintained the whole time was probably like 1 car length or so. It made me really uncomfortable. After driving on the freeway for probably 5 minutes, I decided to take an exit. I exited at the very last second, hoping it would confuse the man. When I did, the guy pulled off right behind me. I slowed down when I got up to a quieter street, and when I came to the stop sign, I thought the guy was going to crash into the back of me. I drove down another quiet road and passed by a gas station and a fast food restaurant that was closed. Now, I was in what looked like a quiet small town with lots of farmland nearby. I really didn't know exactly where I was. I turned at a random road and then turned again at another one a short time later. I didn't really know where I was going or what I was doing. I was just hoping that the guy would stop following me. Maybe if he realized that I knew he was following me and I was just going to keep turning all the time, he would give up. But the guy didn't seem like he wanted to do that. I drove around this random small city for like 10 minutes. The guy kept up behind me the entire time. I was about to turn around and go back to the freeway when I noticed something. I was driving on what appeared to be one of the main roads of the city that I was in. When I was driving down it, I noticed we were coming up on a police station. I saw some of the patrol cars parked in the parking lot and I decided to pull in. I signaled to turn, and at first, the guy behind me did the same. But as I was pulling in, he suddenly veered around me and sped away, going straight instead. When I got into the parking lot, I saw an officer and figured I would tell him about what had happened. After speaking with him and letting him know, I went back on my way. The rest of the way home, I never saw the guy again. To this day, I don't know why he chose to follow me. I'm a female and a former 7-Eleven employee. I worked there 2 years ago for a span of about 6 months. During that time, I was finishing up my education. I mostly worked overnight shifts there, which were fine with me. Sure, being alone at nights is a little strange sometimes, but hardly anybody would come in. For the most part, it was easy. One night, I was working like any other. I sat behind the counter, going on my phone and listening to music. I had been alone, all by myself, with no customers, for probably an hour. A few people had gotten gas, but none of them came inside. The time was probably 2 o'clock in the morning. Then, I suddenly heard the door opening and saw a guy walking in. I hadn't seen a car pull in, and the gas station is not really at a location where people walk to. He walked in and came up to me at the counter. I said hi to him and asked him how I could help. The man asked me where the beer was, and I pointed to the back of the store where they were. We also had some cases sitting around, which I pointed out as well. The man looked around and then walked to the back of the store. I kept sitting there and then went back on my phone. A few minutes later, the man came back up to me at the counter. This guy was sort of tall and thin, was balding, and looked to be in his 40s or 50s. When he came back to the counter, he was not holding any beer. The guy said to me that he liked my tattoos and pointed to my arms. Then he just kind of stood there. I said thanks and asked if he needed help with something. The guy just stared at me for a second and then kind of wandered out of the store. He seemed a little bit off to me, and after he left, I just went back to minding my own business. I had a coworker coming in at 5 a.m., and I would be getting off at 6. Over the next hour, I only had one other customer come inside and pay for gas. At about 3 a.m., I suddenly noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was coming from the window near the front door. When I looked, I saw the guy who had been inside earlier, who had seemed a little bit off. He was looking inside and pressing his face up against the glass window. The look on his face was rather disturbing and creepy. He was looking straight at me as well. I looked at him and then looked away. I wasn't amused by this. It seemed really weird. When I looked back over again about a minute later, he was still there. I tried to just ignore it, but then he started knocking on the window. This guy had to be crazy or something. I decided to get up and ask the man what he was doing and probably tell him to leave as well. I got out from behind the counter and walked over. I opened up the front door to the building, but as soon as I opened it, the man started sprinting away at what appeared to be full speed. He ran all the way past the road and out of my sight. Oh well, I thought, and went back inside to work, shaking my head. For the next few hours, things were peaceful and went on like normal. At 5, my coworker Alex showed up, and things were really easy then. And at 6, I was off for the day and could finally leave. When I was walking out to my car in the parking lot, I happened to notice the man again. He was standing kind of in the grass between the parking lot and the road. The guy was looking right at me. I hurried up and got inside my car and left. After I left, I called my coworker Alex and let him know about the guy just to be aware. Luckily, the man didn't follow me out of the parking lot when I left or anything like that. Now, fast forward 2 days. I worked one of the 2 days and didn't come across the man or anything strange. But on the second day, I was hanging out with a few friends. There's a diner in town that we hang out at a lot. We're friends with the owner and their family, and my friends and I have been going there for years. I was there, sitting in a booth with 2 other friends. We were just hanging out, talking, and having some food. Out of nowhere, I happened to notice the guy who had been at the gas station. He was sitting by himself on the other side of the diner. The whole place wasn't very big. It had maybe like 10 booths and then seats at the diner. The guy was facing me, and I caught him staring. I told my friends about him and who he was. We weren't really sure what to do though. I felt like the chances of this being a coincidence were really slim. But still, he wasn't bothering me and hadn't come up to me or anything like that, so I decided to just ignore it. The man never tried talking to me or anything. When I left, he didn't follow me outside either. For the next few days, the man was completely absent from my life, and that's the way I would have liked it to stay. But then came the last time that I saw the man. It was a typical work shift, and for 90% of it, everything went fine. I didn't see the guy and had dealt with mostly normal customers. When my coworker Alex came in the early morning like he often did, he let me know that it looked like someone was messing around near my car in the parking lot. I walked over to the window and looked. That same guy was appearing to try and open one of my windows or something. It looked like he had some kind of tool as well. I opened the door and yelled out to him, asking what he was doing. The guy looked at me and then ran off down the street. It was so strange. I went over and looked, but luckily he hadn't broken in, at least not yet. After that though, I never saw the guy again. I only worked at the 7-Eleven for about another month after that. Gas stations in the middle of the night can be a weird place. A few months back, I was driving home from visiting some friends. I didn't time out the drive very well, and I found myself on the road at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. I still had a ways to go, but I had lots of caffeine and was doing fine. When my car was starting to run out of gas, I decided to stop at the next place. I took an exit when I saw a sign that there would be a 7-Eleven at the next one. They're usually a good gas station, and I go there all the time. When I pulled in, there was another car getting gas and somebody else in the parking lot. I pulled up to one of the pumps at the south side of it, sort of far away from the building. I paid at the pump and then began fueling my car. As I stood near the car, the other person getting gas drove off. This revealed that there was just one guy now, and he was standing near some of the other gas pumps about 20 feet away, but there were no other cars there. About a minute into me fueling my car, I saw the man start to walk over and approach me. He had a beard and wore kind of baggy and dirty clothes. He walked right up to me, which made me a little bit nervous. When he reached me, he asked me if I had a cigarette he could borrow. I told the guy no. I didn't smoke, and even if I did, I certainly wasn't going to give him a cigarette right next to a gas pump. There are literally signs everywhere that say no smoking. The guy stood there looking at me for a moment or two after I had answered him. Then, he turned away and started walking. He walked back over to another pump as I continued to fill my tank, which always takes a long time. Then, out of seemingly nowhere, the man yelled something and punched a gas pump. It made a loud noise. He hit it a few times, which was really disturbing to see. Then, he angrily started walking over towards the convenience store. He got next to it, where they had rocks up against the building. The man proceeded to grab a few rocks in his hands and start throwing them in my direction. He missed badly with the first couple, but he started walking closer. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had no idea why he was doing this. I quickly stopped getting gas and got inside of my car. A rock actually hit my car after I had gotten back inside. I drove off with the man still firing rocks in my direction. When I was out of there and back on the road, I called the police to report him. I was afraid for whoever was working inside the 7-Eleven, or if anybody else would try to get gas there. They let me know that they would have an officer there shortly to check out the situation. I really hoped that nobody was hurt and everything was resolved. The man definitely seemed like he was on some sort of drugs. He certainly was not in his right mind. It's a pretty scary experience that I will never forget, and I hope the man and everybody else are okay. This story happened back when I was younger. I was about 10 or 11 at the time. During that time period, I lived with my parents in a smaller house near the city. We would often walk to a few stores or gas stations to get things. I would go with one of my older siblings a lot, and there were several places within walking distance. This was on July 11th, because on 7-Eleven they used to give out free Slurpees. I'm not sure if they still do or not, but my older sister asked me if I wanted to go with and get one. Of course, I said yes. We walked there down the sidewalk, which took maybe 10 minutes. It was sometime in the afternoon, maybe even the early evening if I remember correct. When we arrived, I went straight for the Slurpees, and my sister did as well. There were a few other people all around inside, and I had to wait for somebody else to get a Slurpee. My sister and I got them, and then my sister went to the back of the store to go look at something else. I went to go see if there were any good snacks that I wanted, so I went in a different aisle. When I was there, a woman started walking down that aisle. She was holding a small dog. As she approached, she noticed me looking at the dog. It was one of those dogs that's extremely small. She asked me if I liked her dog, and I said yes. I thought it was really cute. The woman then asked me if I would watch her dog for a minute while she used the bathroom. I said that I would, and the woman then asked me if I could actually watch it outside. She said that the dog sometimes didn't like to be held by strangers, and she didn't want to get in trouble for walking it around inside. It seemed fine to me, and I said yes. We both then walked outside of the building. The woman started walking over to a small grass area that was next to the 7-Eleven building. The area was really small, but I guess was a good place for the dog to walk around. Before we got there, though, there was this van parked in the last parking space before the grass area. A man was standing in front of it. He suddenly reached out and grabbed me as I was passing by. He held both of my arms, and the woman then told me to get inside of the van. The side door to it was already open. I didn't want to, but the man was much stronger than me and was pushing me in the direction of it. Everything was happening really fast, and I didn't know what to do. It was then that I heard my sister's voice. She was basically yelling and screaming and told them to let me go. This caught the attention of 2 other people nearby, and they started to look over. The guy finally let me go then. Him and the woman's attention now shifted to trying to get away. I ran back over to my sister, who was just outside the front door of the 7-Eleven, as the man and woman got inside the van and sped off. I remember somebody yelling to call the police as they sped off, and another person yelling to get the license plate number. My sister and I went back inside and waited until the police got there. My parents were called and came down and picked us up after we were done answering questions. It was a really scary experience. Luckily, the man and woman were both located later in the day. I still can't believe that I was almost kidnapped. Every time I think about it, it gives me the creeps.
It was a somewhat nippy autumn night, and I was about halfway into my shift. I was a young man, and I took up any job I really could at the time. In this case, it was a late shift at 7-Eleven. In the United States, 7-Elevens are open 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. This meant that someone had to take up that horrid night shift, and that person was me. As much as the job messed up my sleep schedule, it did help me do my coursework during the day, and it did pay a bit better than the normal shifts. I've been told that working in a convenience store is among the most dangerous jobs in the States, and this claim was honestly understandable. Although my city is decently safe, the people who go to 7-Elevens late at night are a lot different than your normal shopper. From what I saw, it was either crazy crackheads higher than a kite, or a bunch of drunken teenagers falling all over the place trying to make another booze run. This was extremely annoying. My coworker Colin and I were largely responsible for kicking these people out. And while it was an inconvenience, it never got truly out of hand or unsafe. This all changed one Thursday night, however. My coworker Colin had some sort of family emergency to take care of, and this resulted in him having to skip a few shifts. This meant that I was in charge of handling the dreaded 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift completely alone. This truly annoyed me. Colin was a really chill guy. His conversations made the hours go by much faster, and without him, I'd just be alone in some dirty store in the middle of the night. Regardless, I received my orders from my manager, and I had to do what I had to do. I arrived at my shift around 5 minutes late as usual, and things were initially going by completely normal. The people that walked in consisted of the usual late-night shoppers and people in their pajamas stopping for gas last minute. It seemed like a completely normal weekday night at first. But then, a little past the midnight hour, things got really strange. It was 12:15 at night, and I was sitting on my small chair next to the counter. I had just plugged in my phone into a charger, as it was running low on battery from using it all night, and that's when I noticed a car pull up to one of the pumps. It was a large black SUV. The windows in the back were either completely shattered, or lazily replaced with cardboard and duct tape. A tall and rather large-built man stepped out in a trench coat and boots. He turned over to the front door of the store and started to calmly approach it. I just kept glancing at my phone, however. Most people walk in, quickly get something, and leave. There was no need for formalities at this hour. "You call this customer service?" the man said in a low, husky voice. It took me a second or two to process that. The people who come in here, especially at this time, aren't exactly expecting award-winning service. "Oh, sorry, sir. Is there anything I can get for you?" The man just laughed. "Oh, kid, there's nothing you can get for me, but there is something you can do." At first, I thought the man was going to ask for some weird sexual favor. Funnily enough, I'd been asked this before while I was on the job. "You see, I'm not a young man like you. My joints, they don't function like they used to. And you see my car over there? Well, it could use a wash and fill." The man's attitude and overall demeanor were really weird. The way the guy was talking was unsettling as it is. I mean, if the guy could walk all the way over here just fine, why couldn't he fill his own gas or wash his own windshield? However, state law says I have to assist any handicapped or impaired customers if they request it. There was no handicapped sticker on the man's car, or any sign that he was disabled in any way. But hey, if they request it, I have to help them. "Alright, sir, give me a moment," I replied as I placed my phone to the side. I then turned on the pump from my control panel and started heading towards the car. Look at those youthful muscles work. I love to see it. For whatever reason, I ignored the man's creepiness and continued heading towards the car. The sooner I cleaned his windshield and filled his tank, the sooner he'd be out of there. At least that's what I hoped. As I stepped out of the building, the man seemed to remain in the store. He seemed to be browsing up and down the shelves for something. Whatever. I got to the vehicle, and sure enough, the gas cap was wide open and ready for me. As I was filling the van with gas, I couldn't help but think about what the man said. He seemed honestly fine and was totally capable of putting a nozzle in the gas tank. It made me wonder why I was even out there in the first place. But hell, if I could just get this weirdo out of there, I could get back inside to just messing around with my phone. After about a minute or two, the tank was full, and it was time for me to wash the man's windshield. As I stepped around towards the back of the van, however, I heard the back door shut. As weird as this was, keep in mind the car was really beaten down and old. It's kind of expected for a car like that to make weird noises, especially on a windy night like this one. I quickly pulled out the sponge and squeegee and started to get to work. But as I was cleaning the glass, that's when I felt it. The discomfort, the odd sensation of being watched or stalked. As I turned around, I felt a hand go over my eyes, and soon my mouth. I barely had any time to comprehend what was even happening. 1 second I was cleaning glass, and the next I was being headlocked. I then heard the familiar sound of the front door to the store opening, and heavy footsteps coming my way. Too many thoughts were racing through my head at this moment, but somehow, somewhere, I mustered everything I had and flung myself as back hard as I could. The person holding me down crashed into the gas pump and shrieked in pain. "Damn it, Carl," the tall man said. I rolled back onto my feet and sprinted as hard as I could, my breath getting heavier and heavier every large stride I made. I managed to run across into a neighborhood and dive into the bushes, slowly peeping my head out to see if they were still following me in the van. After the longest 10 or so minutes of my life, my adrenaline died down, and I finally got the courage to step out of the bush. Just as I was about to call my manager and then the cops, it hit me. My phone was still in the store charging. Thankfully, however, a close friend of mine lived in the neighborhood I ran away towards. I knocked on his door and told him everything. Naturally, we called the police. When we went back to the station after the police told us they'd arrived, my manager was already there. Somehow, my manager and the police were as or more surprised than I was. Things like this rarely happen in my city. We always considered it a safe place. The police immediately looked through the CCTV footage as my manager suggested. and what we saw shocked us even more. When I had stepped out to wash and fill the van, the man jumped over the counter and tried to find and disable the security cameras in their footage. He couldn't manage to do this, so we just stepped outside and decided that deleting the footage wasn't worth all the time. We managed to capture the men's faces on video right after I made my escape. We then submitted the footage to the higher level police to see what was happening. It turns out, the men were known human traffickers and were on the run from previous kidnappings. The license plate on the van seemed to be fraudulent or stolen, as the numbers only matched a completely different vehicle on the other side of the state. The investigators believed that the men stopped by my city on the way to somewhere else, as they figured it was a safer area and people wouldn't expect them to be there. I quit my job at 7-Eleven immediately after that. The event scarred me. Every time I stepped into another gas station, I would always get reminded of how I almost got kidnapped. Needless to say, I would never pick up a job like that again.
About 2 years ago, I rented a room in a 3-bedroom house. The walls were very thin. My bedroom had one window, which led into the living room, none with outside access. This window will be important later on. There was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but I was content when the new roommate moved in a bit later. Something was off about this guy, but he seemed friendly enough. He was a very tall, large man and was very quiet. Not somebody who I wanted to go out of my way to hang out with, but was still okay to be around. 2 weeks after he moved in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving me and the new tenant alone. For the first few days, things were normal. However, that all changed one night. I was woken up at about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking on my door. The new roommate, we'll call him Kyle, was standing there when I opened up, looking frazzled. He looks me dead in the eye and asks, "So do you want to tell me what was going on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused. Last night I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him, and he says that he heard me screaming, that he saw me through the window, arguing with our landlord, who I had never met in person at this point. He claimed that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way. None of that ever happened. After staring at me for a bit longer, he leaves. The next morning I wake up to the same thing. This time he says he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time. He said that he saw me talking with the master tenant, who, as I mentioned before, was in Hawaii. He also asked me for the badge number of the officer I was talking to. Apparently he saw a bunch of police as well. This time I get angry, and I more or less tell him to cut this shit out. I'm not doing anything, and I have no idea what you're talking about. He got this weird look on his face and said, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. Next time that happens, call the ambulance." After that, he left. But about an hour later, he begins knocking at my door again. When I open up, Kyle repeats the same exact story, verbatim. I tell him to leave me alone, and then I left for work. My workday went about as expected. I'm a bit reluctant to return home, but I was too tired to crash at somebody else's place. Big mistake. At about 1 a.m., I wake up to doors slamming. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom and the living room, then to the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily to himself. I can see his shadow pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room. Since my room is dark, he can't see inside. Suddenly he screams, "I can't live like this anymore. Why are you doing this to me?" I thought he was on the phone, so I didn't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name. I then realized his statements were directed at me. I knew I had to get out of there, so I quietly crept out of bed and started getting dressed, packing up bags of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I can hear you." He then charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door, but not touching the door itself. I look toward my window, and I see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear against the glass. I was fucking terrified, and I sat completely still, not moving a muscle. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window. I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now my shoes are kept on a rack outside my door and not inside my room, so I know that when I leave, I'm going to need a moment to put them on. I decided to wait until he was back in his room, at which time I planned to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He then screams, "Do you want to fight about this? Come on out right now, and we'll fight, I swear to God." Now, I am a very small girl, and only 5 feet tall. This guy is easily 3 times my size, so I'm definitely not looking to fight. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights, and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure I can't hear any movement, and then I decided to take my chance. I took a breath and opened my door quickly, then stepped out and grabbed my shoes, before looking up a second later to see him standing there in the dark hallway with nothing but a pair of boxers and socks on. He then spoke in a low, calm voice. "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no from me, so I grabbed my shoes and ran out the front door with them in hand. I ran about half a block barefoot before stopping and putting them on. When I looked behind me, I saw him standing in the porch light of our front door, watching me run, but not moving. Luckily for me, I had a friend who lived about 2 blocks away, and I had their spare key on me. So I let myself in and crashed there for the night, and that's where I stayed for the next week, while we worked things out with our landlord. Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He said he didn't remember anything that happened, and wasn't sure if it was real or not, but if I said that's what went down, then it must be true. The day Kyle left, he sent me a photo of the house keys sitting on the table, along with a message that said, "I'm out." I take a friend over there with me to scout it out, and to make sure he actually left. When we got there, we discovered that not only did he leave a bunch of food and furniture behind, but he had ripped out all the fire alarms from the ceiling, and had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt from the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. The door to my bedroom can only be locked by using a key from the outside, and had been locked when we arrived, which meant that Kyle still had a key to my room. We called a locksmith right away. Even after the locks were changed, I was still terrified to stay there alone, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He obviously had some kind of psychological condition, but I also wonder what could have happened to me if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I had never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start grad school. My boyfriend flew with me. Before the trip, I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon, in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him about an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was still coming. I called, but he didn't answer. So my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. About 10 minutes before the appointment, the guy calls me. "Hey, are you coming?" He sounded like an older man and had this very strange, slow way of talking, but I just thought he was older. "Yes, we're in front of the house now." He then got extremely upset. "We?" "Oh yeah, my boyfriend's with me." "You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that." It had never crossed my mind to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man, and after a very long pause, he said, "I'm sorry. It's just, sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon." He then hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man said, and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave. But there were slim pickings in terms of real estate, so I, stupidly, said that we had to stay, in case this was the place. As we were discussing this, we see a man leave the house we were going to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking. He took one look at us and ran to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, so now we're really starting to get creeped out. But this isn't enough for us to just bail. Yet. Me and my boyfriend looked at each other, wondering what to do. Soon, the landlord arrives. He looked to be in his 50s, very tall and strong-looking. His eyes were completely blank and devoid of emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I would shake your hands, but mine are dirty." "Where from?" my boyfriend asks. "Work," he flatly responds. He then asks me a lot of questions, completely ignoring my boyfriend. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for living? Is my boyfriend moving to this town as well? The entire time, he stares into my eyes without blinking. I try to give him answers that are as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend is asking the landlord the same kind of questions, which he refuses to answer any of them. He then says, out of nowhere, "Let me show you the basement." At this point, we really should have left, but we didn't. I kept thinking that this was an eccentric old man from a small town, and we're city folk, and he was just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted to get out of there, but he followed us, as the man led us to the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door, and we saw that there were stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, and the light did not turn on. Normally, the response for this would be, "Oh shit, the light's out," or something like that. But he just says, and slowly walked down into the darkness. He then just stood there, without moving, in the dark, then said, "Aren't you coming down?" There's nothing to see if the light's out," says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks back up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically. When my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man became very upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to get it open secretly, though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and kept reaching his hands into his pockets, only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed arranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not things a 20-something-year-old might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but there was no other food in the fridge or pantry, or even utensils. There were maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet, and the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he had been renting the house. Finally, the man had showed us every single room except for one. He claimed that the one he refused to open for us was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished. There was furniture up there. It would smell bad. The last one I believed, because when I stood near the door, it smelled terrible. After a while, we made our excuses and got out of there. The man walked us out, then got into his car, but when he thought we had turned the corner, he exited his car and slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something off about this guy, Googled him that night. We found out 3 things. That he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople. There was no evidence of him owning or managing real estate, as he claimed on Craigslist, and that he had listed his home address as the very house we had been touring. So that was definitely the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me.
This was the first and only time I ever used Craigslist. It was about 5 years ago. In the springtime, when the snow was all melted and the grass was starting to grow long again, I went to my garage to get the lawnmower. I had an old push mower, and it hadn't been used in months. When I wheeled it out in my garage, it wouldn't start. I couldn't figure out the problem, and after researching online with no luck, I realized I probably needed to buy a new one. The one I had was really old anyways, and it had had some problems in the past. My yard is not all that big, so I only needed another push mower, and I figured they wouldn't be too expensive to buy a used one. I went to Craigslist and searched in my local area for lawnmowers. After browsing for a little while, I found one that seemed to be the best deal. It was $100, and it seemed like a reasonable price to me. After some thought, I decided to reach out and let the seller know that I was interested in buying it. I texted the number that was on the listing and received a response about an hour later. The response said that if I wanted to buy the mower, I could come by and purchase it tomorrow night. I agreed, and I was then provided with an address and a time to pick it up, which was 8 p.m. This was a little later than I would have liked, but I agreed. The next night, I drove my small SUV to the address that I was sent, and I texted the seller letting them know that I was on my way. I got a text back saying, "Sounds good, the mower's in the garage, come right in." It took me almost 20 minutes to get there, and it was a little bit farther than I wanted. When I arrived, it seemed to be a pretty typical residential neighborhood. There were a bunch of houses along both sides of the street. I saw the address of the house that I was going to. The garage door was open, and I parked my car on the side of the street. I texted the seller that I had arrived. I waited in my car until I got a response. It took about a minute, but the seller said, "Come on up." I got out of my car, walked across the street, and then up the driveway. When I got inside the garage, it was not very well lit. There was just a dim light bulb in the middle. I looked around, and there was miscellaneous stuff that you would typically find in a garage, but there was no lawnmower. I took a few more steps in and called out, "Hey, I'm here." I didn't hear anything. I saw the normal step up to the door leading to the house, but then I saw another door. It was in the far back right corner, and this was a door that was open and seemingly leading into another hallway. I saw a piece of a cardboard box was propped up against the door, and written in marker it said, "Lawn mower," and then had an arrow pointing inside the door. I was a little confused by this, and it seemed a little bit sketchy, but I walked over to it. When I got to the doorway, things were pretty dark, and I couldn't see well, but I did see that there was a door to the right and then a staircase going straight down to seemingly a basement. The arrow was pointing down the stairs, so maybe this guy had his lawnmower in the basement for some reason. I started walking down the stairs to the basement area. When I made it to the bottom of the stairs, I could now see that the entire basement appeared to be unfinished, and the lighting wasn't much better in there either. Still, I didn't see a lawnmower. Then I heard noise coming from up the stairs. It was the door from the garage leading to the basement, and it was closing. It wasn't slammed or anything. It was closed relatively quietly, but I still heard it. I looked up the staircase, but didn't see anybody. Whoever had closed the door closed it from the outside. I suddenly had a really bad feeling, and I just wanted to leave. I walked back up the stairs as quickly as I could. As I was making it to the top of the stairs, I heard another door close, and then footsteps. Somebody else was in the house. It sounded like they had gone in the other door leading from the garage. I tried opening the door to the garage, but it was somehow locked from the outside. I couldn't open it. Then I tried the other door leading to inside the house. That one was already open a crack. When I made it inside the rest of the house, I saw that I was in some sort of hallway. It was small and led to a living room type of area that had a sliding glass door that went out to a back patio. I heard footsteps approaching from another room around the corner. Without hesitating, I went to the sliding glass door and opened it. Once outside, I shut it behind me, just in time to see a man coming into view inside the house. I didn't get a good look at him at all, but he was walking in my direction at a rather fast speed. I bolted out of there, sprinting all the way from the backyard to around the house and garage and all the way back to my car. When I made it inside my vehicle, I started the engine and immediately left. I drove all the way back home, and then I blocked the number just because I didn't want anything to do with that guy. I reported my experience on the Craigslist website and then decided to buy a new lawnmower from the store. Since then, I haven't used Craigslist. I'm not sure if I'll use it again sometime. Maybe things have changed. All I know is I will never forget that experience I had, and I hope to never have one like that again. Last year, I broke my leg and was unable to do a lot of things that I typically do. I live alone in a smaller house, and my friends and family were really nice in helping me out when I first got the crutches. Soon after, though, I realized that I would have to do yard work, and I didn't want to ask family or friends to do it. Everybody in my neighborhood takes great pride in their yards. The lawns are all very green and trimmed often. There's generally nice flowers in most as well. I have a typical garden, just some basic flowers by the house, and then most of my front yard is just grass that I cut weekly. I decided to go on Craigslist to find somebody to keep up my yard for a few weeks until I would be able to again. There was only 3 weeks until I would be able to do yard work, and I didn't want to hire a company because I knew that would be really expensive. I found an ad on Craigslist that said, "Male just graduated from high school, looking to earn money doing odd jobs during summer." He even listed yard work in the ad, and I figured this would be a good person to go with. I contacted the kid, whose name was Michael. He responded saying that he was excited to have a job for a few weeks, and I told him he would come over once a week. The job would be cutting the grass and watering the flowers, also cutting down weeds if there were any, and picking up sticks in the yard. Probably would only take an hour or two each week. The next week, Michael arrived at my house, and I went outside to greet him. Right away, though, things seemed strange. Michael did not appear to be in high school at all. He had a full beard for starters, and I know some high schoolers can grow full beards, but he just didn't look 18 or 19, more like 29 or 30. Right away, I said to Michael that I thought he said he had just graduated high school. He looked confused for a moment and then said that he looks a little older than he actually is. He admitted that he hadn't just graduated, but claimed he forgot to change his ad for a few years. More like 10 years, I thought. Still, he looked capable of doing the work, and he was already here, so I gave him the information that he needed, and he started working. I went inside and went over some work stuff. I was working part-time at home and part-time in the office at the time. Occasionally, I would glance out the window to see what Michael was doing. The first day went pretty well. He did all of the maintenance work in about an hour, and then I paid him, and he left. The next week was a bit different. There was the same amount of work to be done, if not less, but he was there for almost 3 hours. I wasn't quite sure why he took so long, because I wasn't paying him by the hour. But finally, he finished, I paid him, and he left. The next week, which was the last one, he was there for a lengthy amount of time again, and this time, I noticed him poking around some of the windows and areas of my house from the outside. I really didn't know what he was doing. Cleaning the windows was not part of the job. That's seemingly what he was doing though. I was careful not to let him notice me when I watched him work, but seeing this was a little confusing. At last, he was done, and I paid him for the final time, and he left. I was glad to be done working with Michael. He was a little strange and definitely misrepresented himself. But that same night, at about midnight, I was still awake and on my phone in my bedroom. I'm a bit of a night owl, and I frequently stay up past midnight. I heard the sound of a window opening at the opposite end of my house. Immediately, I knew what was happening. I just knew it had to be Michael. Looking back, I could have been wrong, but I had more than a hunch. I didn't know what he wanted or what he was trying to do, but when I suddenly heard footsteps coming into the house, I knew I had to do something. I stepped out into my hallway, just a couple of steps. Then, I shouted as loud as I could that I knew it was Michael and I had a gun. I didn't have a gun, but I wanted to scare him off. It actually worked, and I heard footsteps moving back until I heard noises around the window again. I left my room and walked into the living room to see an open window. I went to the front of my house and saw what sure enough appeared to be Michael running out of the front yard and onto the street. I made sure that all of my windows and doors were closed, then I went back to bed. The next day, I went to the police with all of my information. It was not difficult at all for them to find Michael because his ad was still on Craigslist. I'm glad I was awake that night when he tried breaking in, or I'm not sure what would have happened.
Do you know how they say that hindsight is 20/20? Well, looking back on that day, the more I think about what happened, all of the signs were there from the beginning. It was 2006. I had just turned 24 and finally gotten a home for myself. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom home, but it was a home, and I was proud of it. I had just graduated from college and landed a solid job at a small accounting firm, so I finally had a way to earn some money. That being said, I was still in the process of saving up, so at the time, I was essentially living paycheck to paycheck, like most people. In order to make a little bit of extra money, I was in the process of selling things that I didn't need anymore, a lot of which was being sold over Craigslist. I had managed to sell a few cheap paintings and piece of furniture that I owned on the site, so I figured it was a good place to start. I posted a few items, and it wasn't long before I had a response. Someone had emailed me about buying an old cell phone, and as luck would have it, they were able to meet that day. I didn't like the idea of meeting at my house or at their house, so I asked if they would mind meeting at a local diner. He agreed, and we were set up to meet later that day. The time came and I grabbed the phone and its charger, got in my car, and made the 15-minute drive to the diner. As I pulled in, I noticed that it wasn't as full as I expected it to be, which was nice, and I didn't think anything of it at first, but the more I tell this story, the more I realize that I noticed a white Ford Taurus parked next to a red Chevy Impala. As I said, I didn't think anything was strange about it at the time. I pulled into a parking spot that was close to the door, and I texted the buyer to let him know that I was there. He said he would be at the diner in a few minutes, so I just turned on some music and waited. After a few moments, a white Ford Taurus pulls into the spot next to me, and me and the buyer made the exchange. Everything went fine. We both said thank you and headed our separate ways. As I made my way home though, I noticed something odd. I had made a few turns along the way, and I could swear that I was being followed by a red car. Again, I made no connection to the car in the parking lot. As I got closer to my house, I grew more and more concerned that something was wrong. However, one intersection away from my house, I noticed the car turn down one of the side roads. I was relieved to make it home, safe and sound. I made my way into the house and made sure to lock the door behind me. I threw some leftovers into the microwave and got ready to settle down for the night. After dinner, I hopped into the shower and began to get ready for bed. I would have gone to sleep as if nothing was wrong had I not remembered that I left the curtains to the living room open. I don't like the idea of someone being able to see inside my house, so I went to close them. I paused when I got to the window though, because I could have sworn I saw something in the road. It was at that moment I realized that I was looking at a car that had parked at the end of my driveway. I froze. My first instinct was to look to the door, and it was still locked, thankfully. I then quickly made my way over to the light switch to the front porch, and I could see the car as clear as day. It was the red car that had been following me, a red Chevy Impala. To my horror, the car was empty. I didn't know how many people there were, or where they were, but someone was outside my house for some reason. I pulled my phone out and quickly called the police. I explained to the 911 operator what the issue was, and they assured me that someone was on the way and asked me to stay on the line. That was when I heard them, the sound of multiple people walking along my porch. I turned out my light, but it didn't scare them away. I tried to poke my head around the corner to the window without being seen, hoping that I could catch a glimpse of who was outside. To my horror, one of the men was standing with his covered face pressed against the glass trying to look inside. As soon as my head came around the corner, we made eye contact. He didn't move at first. All I could think to do was to say, "Police are coming. You better get out of here right now." I tried to sound stern, but I honestly probably sounded like a sniveling child. It was like clockwork though, and almost right after I finished my sentence, I could see the flashing lights coming down the road. The dispatcher wasn't lying. Someone was actually right down the road. The men noticed the lights and took off to their car, but they didn't make it in time. The police were in the driveway and the 3 men were taken into custody. I recognized one of them as the man who was driving the white Ford Taurus. The police said, "This sort of thing happens all of the time."
I was a 20-year-old female at the time, and I was just about to move out of my parents' house 2 weeks later. I was going to be moving in my apartment in the city. It was a Wednesday morning around 10 a.m. I was on a summer vacation, and I was off from work that day, so I was still in bed. My parents had left for work earlier that day. Back then, my room was in the basement, and my window was right next to the stairs leading to the front door. I was woken up by the sound of someone walking up the stairs, and I thought it was odd, so I got up. I took my phone and I went upstairs to try and get a better look at who this could be. Once upstairs, I saw from the kitchen window a man leaving our front yard and going back to the sidewalk. I was very relieved and I thought it was probably just someone selling stuff. But then, the man turned around, went back into our front yard, and started walking toward the right side of our house where there was a door leading to the kitchen, right where I was standing. The man then knocked, and he had asked if there was someone home. Looking back, I should have said yes through the window, but I was so scared and confused that I didn't say anything back. He then walked back to the front yard and back on the sidewalk and started walking away. Again, I was relieved, and I then told myself that maybe it was just a friend of my dad's that I didn't know, and that maybe he was looking for him. This didn't seem right, but I was trying to find any reason for this man to be there other than wanting to break in. Just when I thought the man had left, I saw him come back yet again and walk to the left side of my house towards the backyard. Now, I was very scared at this point, and I knew he wanted to get in. I go to the front door, unlock it, and I waited for a couple of seconds. I then start to hear something cutting off the screen of my parents' bedroom window, and at that point, I'm literally shaking. I opened the front door quietly and ran out of the house, calling 911. Within about 5 minutes, the police arrived, but unfortunately, the guy had ran away, and they never did end up catching him. Needless to say, I was terrified my first 3 months alone in my first apartment. This happened only a month ago, and it doesn't really scare me anymore. It just constantly makes me think, what if? I'm in college, and I'm still living with my parents and older sister. It was spring break, and my parents went on a road trip while my sister and I stayed home alone. 2 nights after my parents left town, I was at the house alone because my sister was out with her boyfriend. It was around 5 or 6 o'clock, and I decided to go work out because I was really bored and I could use it. I live less than half a mile from a hotel, so I used their gym because it's so close. I was going to jog there like I usually did, but I changed my mind right before I left because I didn't want to walk back home from the gym. I knew that I would be all tired if I did that, so I got my keys and I decided to drive to the gym. I walked out of the front door and I paused for a second because I got a random feeling to lock the front and back door. My mom is really paranoid about locking the doors and windows because she's scared that a crazy person will break in or hurt us, or worse, kill us. She always tells me to lock the door, but I rarely do, especially if I'm leaving the house for only a short period of time. But for some reason, I got a feeling to lock the doors. So I went back inside, locked the back door, and made sure to lock the front door as well when I left. I drove to the gym, and I was then there for about an hour and a half. Not long after I got there, I randomly got a really bad gut feeling that made my stomach twist and anxiety high. I also have paranoia about things like my mother, but it's different. For some weird reason, I'd blamed the bad gut feeling on my house catching on fire with no one able to save my dog because I had locked both doors. But it doesn't consume my thoughts or make me want to go home or anything. I finally leave and I get back home in minutes. My house wasn't on fire, which I knew deep down that it wasn't anyways. So I get out of the car and I walk to my front door, pulling out my keys to unlock it. But before I had even reached to unlock the door, I then paused because I saw a brown napkin-looking thing wrapped tightly around the door handle. My mind instantly went to the recent fentanyl poisonings, and how there were cases of things like napkins and bills being smeared with fentanyl, causing people to overdose when they touched them. I didn't touch it. I called my parents because I started to get scared, and I didn't really know what to do. My mother was understandably freaked out, and she told me not to touch it. I talked with my dad, and men being men, no hate, logic is appreciated here. He tried to be logical and then tell me that someone must have put an ad on the door handle and that another person must have ripped it off our door. I then FaceTimed them and I showed them what it looked like. It clearly wasn't an ad. It looked like thick paper bag material. I also made sure to tell them that I was staring right at the door handle before I left for the gym, and there was absolutely nothing on the door handle before, meaning someone came up and wrapped it around the door handle while I was at the gym. I was pretty freaked out, but it was early dusk outside, so there was still a good amount of light around me, thankfully. My mom calmed me down, but my dad was still thinking we were overreacting. I unlocked the door, got my gloves from my dad's truck, and I took the brown napkin thing off the door handle, throwing it on the ground very fast. I kept the gloves on, opened the door, went inside, put the gloves in the washing machine, then wiped my front door handle with Clorox wipes. I then shut the door and locked it, not knowing what to do with the paper bag that was just lying on the porch. I say paper bag now because as I looked at the bag on the ground through the window, I could clearly see that it was a small paper brown bag, and it was 100% not an ad someone puts on people's doors. It looked like the type of paper bag that holds sauces or silverware from a restaurant, and it was curled into a C shape from being wrapped around the handle so tightly. I kept watching outside my house through my windows, but I never saw anyone or even a feeling of being watched. I calmed down completely, and I had waited for my sister and her boyfriend to come home. I called my own boyfriend, and I told him all about it. He promised to leave me with Second Amendment protection for the rest of the time my parents were gone, because he was really creeped out that someone would come up and put a brown bag on our door whether it had fentanyl or not. My sister came home, and I told her and her boyfriend everything. They were freaked out too, also assuming that there was probably fentanyl on the bag. Them being there gave me courage, so I went back outside with gloves on, and I picked up the suspicious brown paper bag. I went back inside to show them. They both gathered around me and then watched as I started to uncrumple the bag from its C shape. On the inside of the C shape, the part that was touching the door handle, there was a gooey clear liquid that had the consistency of runny snot smeared all across the inside of it. We all went silent as our fentanyl fears were even greater. I quickly closed the bag and then put it in the trash, taking off the gloves and putting those in the washing machine as well. That was the end of it though. Nothing new or weird since then. I really wish we had cameras or a ring so we'd have more information on who, how, and why. I would really like to know what you guys think it was. To anyone who hears this, do you think I'm overreacting? Do you think it really was fentanyl wrapped up in that tiny little napkin? Or do you think it was a sex trafficking tactic? I live near Houston, not too close, but a good distance. I know the sex trafficking is hot there. Or maybe it was someone who was just really high and just randomly chose our house to mess with, and actually put snot on our door handle. But that's really not likely because we have police officers that stroll through the neighborhood. And people don't just walk around high like that. It's a small neighborhood too, only 8 streets. And even without the police officers, this is a decent neighborhood, with maybe a few but most likely no drug users. It's really just a bunch of old people. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments, because I still really wonder about it a lot. What happened in this story took place around 4 years ago. To set the scene, me and my family live in what you would say is a nice neighborhood. It's outside of the city limits, and the houses are not right on top of each other, but you could walk to the neighbors within 3 minutes or so. Therefore, it's not really the type of neighborhood that many scary or weird things happen in. Although, the only time I've ever really been freaked out over something that happened while living in this neighborhood happened in early summer, while both of my parents were at work, while I and my brother were at home alone. I was around 16 at the time, so we were easily able to take care of ourselves. It was really starting to get warm outside and in our house as we live in the South, so I then opened our sunroom door. I left the screen door shut, but I had opened the main door to let in some air from outside. After doing so, I lay down on the sofa and I ended up dozing off. I was awoken by the sound of the screen door handle turning and what sounded like knocking. It jolted me out of my sleep, and to my surprise, there were 2 men standing in the doorway, one knocking on the wooden part of the screen door, and the other was turning the handle as if it was just going to come right in our house. I leaped off the couch and quickly went to the door, asking them what they needed. The older of the 2 men stated that their car was right down the street and that their battery had died and they needed to be jumped off. Now, at 16, I wasn't really thinking that they had any malicious intentions. So I told them to wait a second, and I would call my dad and ask if he had any jumper cables in the garage. I closed the main door that had previously been open, and I went and got my phone off the sofa. The 2 men stayed in the same position and watched me through the door as I called my dad. From the start of our conversation, my dad was already really weirded out once I told him what happened. And then he told me he had the jumper cables with him in his truck at work, and that I just needed to tell the guys to try somewhere else. After getting off the phone with my dad, I went back to the door, and I told the men I didn't have any. I then apologized for being unable to help, and I shut the door back. I then just watched them as they walked just past the bushes that lined up our driveway. They got into an old silver sedan, and then drove out of our neighborhood very swiftly.
I immediately started freaking out, as they had literally just told me that their battery died and they needed to be jumped off. I called my dad back, and I then explained to him that the men had just gotten into a car that was supposedly dead and how they sped off. He told me to just lock the doors and to call 911 if anyone else came back to the house. Thankfully, no one returned, and nothing like that ever happened again. I can't even begin to imagine what would have been in store for me if there had been any jumper cables in my house.
This happened when I was home alone as a kid. It was the summertime, and I was home during summer break. Both of my parents were at work, and I think I was about 12 years old. I have an older brother, and he went to one of his friends' houses that day. When I was home alone, I would just hang out and do whatever. Usually, I would go on the computer that we had and play Minecraft or something like that. It was probably sometime in the early afternoon, and I had been on the computer in the living room for a while. I moved into the kitchen to get something to eat. The kitchen was at the back side of the house, and we lived in a split level. I will also mention that the neighborhood was pretty average and a little bit on the quieter side. It was when I was standing in the kitchen that I saw something out the window. I just barely saw movement at first, but it looked like somebody was walking by. I moved over to another window to see. That's when I saw a man walking to the back side of the house. He was wearing a sort of construction vest and had a hat on. I realized that it must be the meter reader. I remember that they came around every so often to our house. I calmed down almost immediately. I had been a little worried seeing a guy walking into our backyard. He went to the very back side of our house and near one of the basement windows. I went back to finding some food in the kitchen. After I was in the kitchen for a good 5 minutes though, I looked over and noticed that the guy was still there. Usually, they would come and go really quick and only be there for like a minute at most. I went back into the living room to go back on the computer, but a short time later, I just had the feeling that I should get up and make sure that the man was now gone. Maybe it was because I was home alone and a kid, so I was a little bit paranoid. I carefully walked back over to the window and could see that the man was actually still there. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't tell exactly what he was doing because I could only see part of him from the angle that I was at, which was higher up than he was. He seemed to be doing something and was near the basement window, but I couldn't tell what exactly he was doing. I thought about going downstairs and looking out of that window, but I knew that the man would see me right away if I did. I went to walk over to another window upstairs, which would have a better angle, but I had to be careful so the guy wouldn't see me. Unfortunately, I really messed up. As I was walking over, I accidentally hit a can that was near the edge of a counter in the kitchen. I knocked it over and it fell onto the ground. This made a loud noise, and the next thing I knew, I saw the man quickly walking away. He moved back to the side of the house. I moved to the front of the house, and I watched the man casually walking down the street until I could no longer see him. I felt like he was really suspicious. I questioned whether he was even a meter reader or not. Why would he leave so suddenly like that? For the most part, though, I was just happy that he was now gone. I went back to the computer. I stayed there for the most part until my brother and parents came back home. When they did, I didn't even think to tell them about the guy that had been there. I thought he was gone for good. My brother's bedroom, as well as mine, happened to be in the basement, and my parents' bedroom was upstairs. Because it was summertime, we would stay up pretty much as late as we wanted. I remember that on this night, my parents went to bed, and my brother went down to his bedroom. I stayed up and was on the computer. All of the lights in the house were off, except for a small lamp in the living room near me. I stayed up on the computer until I got really tired, which was probably at about 1 a.m. Then, I turned off the lamp and went downstairs to go to bed. When I got downstairs, I had to walk past a little living room that was in the basement in order to get to my bedroom. As I was walking past, I happened to see something in the window. The man was back. I could only see a figure of a man, but I could guess who it was. This was the same window that he had been at earlier in the day. I then heard noises coming from the window, as if it was going to come open. I was suddenly really afraid. It was really dark down there, and I hit the light switch, which I happened to be really close to. When this happened, it lit up the whole room, and I could no longer see the man very well. I heard some noise from right outside the window, though, and then it sounded like he was running away. I went running as well, but back upstairs into my parents' bedroom. I knocked on their door and yelled for them to wake up. About a minute later, my dad came out asking what was going on. By the time I explained it all, the man was long gone. My dad went out and inspected the house all around, though. He was able to find that the back window the man kept messing with had quite a bit of damage. It had almost came off. It was like the man had been trying to remove the window and get inside the house, and he was really close to succeeding. After that night, though, the man never came back. I remember being really scared for a while that he would, and I slept upstairs on the couch because I felt safer there. Luckily, he never did. This happened back when I was in college. During the summers, I lived back home with my parents at their house. I had almost the entire basement to myself, and they wouldn't really go down there much when I was gone. There was a big TV down there, and then my bedroom and a bathroom. It was really nice to have all of that space. I drove home from school after I had finished my finals and packed up my stuff from the college dorm. When I arrived back at my parents' house, they happened to be gone. They told me that they would be back in a few hours and were out for the night. That meant that I would be home alone. I did have my own house key, so when I got back, I was able to get inside. I spent the first bit of time unpacking a bunch of my stuff and putting some of it into storage and in the basement. I went down into the basement and I stayed in the main room and was using the TV for a while. It was then that I thought I heard a noise coming from inside of my bedroom. I hadn't been in there yet, and the door was closed. I didn't know what it could be, but I wasn't scared or anything like that. I casually got up and walked over to the door. Then I opened it. When I did, I heard the sound of my closet door closing. It was kind of out of my view, and when I looked over to it, the door was completely shut. Suddenly, I was now a little bit concerned about what this could be. Only a person could close the door like that, and I was home all by myself. I thought about going over and opening the closet door, but decided not to. I turned around and walked out of the room instead. I no longer wanted to be downstairs, and I went up into the living room upstairs. As I was up there, probably 30 minutes went by without anything happening. I was just watching TV and relaxing on the couch. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of somebody walking up the staircase. I knew that it wasn't my parents because they weren't home yet. I looked over to the stairs. The person was not in my view yet, but I kept looking. Then I saw a man start to come into view, and he was walking up the stairs towards me. This guy looked a little bit older than me, but had a beard and long hair. He looked like he had to be on some kind of drug or something. As he approached me, I quickly got up. I backed away and asked him who he was. The guy didn't say anything. He just kept walking closer. I told him that he needed to get out of here or I was going to call the police. The guy didn't say anything though and kept getting closer and closer to me. I was backed up as much as I could and would soon reach the wall. He continued to approach me. I then ran to the side and was now in the back corner of the house. The guy kept coming near me. Then he started to charge at me. This guy had to be insane. When he lunged for me, I jumped out of the way. He caught part of my leg, and I fell to the ground. The man fell also. I was able to get to my feet before he did, and I ran to the staircase and went down the stairs as quickly as possible. When I made it to the bottom, I opened the door and left the house. The crazy guy did the same, but a little bit after me. I went sprinting down the neighborhood street, yelling at the guy to get away from me. He stopped chasing me eventually, and kind of wandered off into somebody else's yard. Then I was finally able to compose myself and call 911. When the police got to my street, I didn't know where the guy was anymore. I had walked back to our house and was standing in the front yard. The guy ended up being found about 15 minutes later. I guess he went and hid in somebody's backyard and they saw him and called the police. The police happened to already be there a few houses away at my place and picked the guy up. I'm really not sure how he got into my parents' house or how long he had been there. I'm guessing he got in shortly after they left. I do know that he was there the entire time that I was, and that really gives me the creeps. I live by myself in an apartment. It's really close to downtown of a big city. There are lots of people that live in the area, but I've never witnessed anything that crazy until recently. A few months ago was when this story took place. It had been another long day of work and I had just gotten home. I worked a long shift and I love my job, but it can be very tiring. After walking home, I got into my apartment building and up to the 4th floor where my place was. I got inside, closed the door and locked it like I always did, and then headed to take a shower, put on some comfortable clothes, and go to bed. I had made it about 10 feet away from my front door when I heard the knob turning. Somebody was trying to get in. This was strange and something that had never happened before. I stopped in my tracks and then moved over to the door and looked out the peephole into the hallway. Nobody was there. Whoever had tried to enter, I guess, had just left. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe it wasn't. Either way, I was really tired and just wanted to take a shower and go to bed. About 20 minutes later, I was in bed and just browsing on my phone before I fell asleep. During this time, all of my lights in my apartment were out, and it was completely silent inside. That's when I heard my doorknob being turned again. But not once this time, multiple times. There was no knock, but I knew whoever had tried to enter before was likely back. I couldn't sleep with the thought of someone trying to enter my apartment. I got up from bed and tiptoed over to the door to look out once again. This time, I saw somebody. A man stood there just outside of my front door. I kind of freaked out when I saw him. He looked kind of sketchy. Wasn't well dressed or put together. He was just standing there and looking at my door. Then he tried opening it another time. He sort of looked around the hallway and then back to my door. I kept watching and he stood there for maybe another minute. Then he turned to the right and started walking away down the hallway. The hallway led straight down to the stairs and elevator area. I waited to make sure that the guy was leaving, and about 10 seconds after he left my view, I quietly opened my door. I snuck out into the hallway and took a few steps out to make sure that the guy was going to leave. Hopefully that would give me peace of mind and I could go back to bed. At first, I saw the man a good distance down the hallway, walking away still. He was almost at the end of the hall. But then, he stopped and turned around and faced me. He started heading towards me, and his walk quickly turned into a sprint. I hurried as quickly as I could to get back inside my apartment and close the door. As soon as I made it inside, I slammed it and locked it. The man reached the door probably a second later and tried opening it again. After he realized it wouldn't open, he pounded on the door a few times. I yelled to the other side, asking what the man wanted. He did not answer me, but kept standing there. I watched still from the peephole inside. He tried opening the door again. I yelled that I was calling the police, and then the man finally turned and left. Still, I wasn't convinced that he was actually gone. I waited around for about an hour, checking out my door every so often. He didn't return though. Finally, I was able to go back to bed. I haven't seen the man since that night, and looking back, I think he probably followed me home on the street. I might have even let him into my apartment building without knowing. I didn't really pay that good of attention as I walked home, but now I do.
And as I was in the process of taking off my shoes, I could have sworn I heard something come from the room where we used to store our moving boxes in the back of the trailer. At first, I assumed it was just a box or the house settling, and I didn't pay the noise any mind. But before I could even stand up from taking my shoes off, I heard it again. This time it worried me a bit, so I decided to call out to see if my mom had come home early. But when I yelled out, there was no response. Still, something felt a bit odd to me, so I decided to check the room out real quick before getting comfortable. I poked my head through the door and looked around, but from what I could tell, nothing had changed, which reassured me that I had in fact heard the house settling. After that, I went about my normal routine. I stepped into my room and put my backpack on my bed before walking back out into the kitchen for a quick snack. I reached into the cabinet and pulled out a fruit roll-up, but before I could open it, I heard another sound coming from the back room. Only this time, it was followed by something that shook me to my core. After the sound of something thumping on the ground in the room, I heard what was undoubtedly a man let out a single cough. I dropped my snack and instinctively began running through the house and toward my bedroom. I'm not sure why I chose my room instead of the front door. Maybe it was where I felt the safest. But either way, I sprinted into my bedroom, which was 2 doors down from the back room, and without hesitating, I did the only thing I could think of, just like I had seen in movies. I grabbed my wooden desk chair and propped it up against my bedroom door. It was perfect timing too, because as soon as the door was wedged shut, whoever was in my house began banging up against my bedroom door. I fell back in fear and began looking around to think of what I could do next. And that was when I came to my senses. I looked over to my window and saw my escape. I was able to open it up and push the screen out before climbing through it. and since we lived in a trailer, the window were only about 5 feet off the ground. Once I was out of the house, I quickly ran through my yard and over to my neighbor's house. It only took him a few seconds before he answered the door after I began pounding on it and screaming for help. My neighbor opened the door and I explained to him what was happening. He didn't question it at all, and as soon as he saw the panic in my face, he let me into his house and we both waited there for the police and my mom to arrive home. The police showed up about 30 minutes before my mom did, but it was still too late to catch the intruder. By the time they showed up, he had already left the house. Not before destroying it though. All 3 of the rooms appeared to be ransacked, and my mother's jewelry collection was missing. For a while, I ended up staying at my neighbor's house or a friend's house after school while I waited for my mom to get home. I just wasn't comfortable being alone in my house anymore.
For some context, my family and I did not have a happy home life. We often would move around every year, if not several times a year. My stepdad had a severe drinking problem, and my mom had varying levels of drug issues. This story takes place after we moved from North Carolina to Winslow, Arizona. I was just about 8 or 9 years old at the time. I never truly understood why we moved out that way. My mom said it was to visit her stepfather, whom we ended up living with for a few months, before leaving due to the violence. We're a family of 5, and we eventually moved in and out of motel rooms for the remainder of our time in Arizona. My parents had a rule that we kids, my 2 brothers and myself, could not spend the day in the motel room. This rule had no exclusions, despite Arizona being over 100 degrees outside most days. We would even have to eat our meals outside and had limited bathroom breaks. My brothers and I would often occupy our time seeing if the soda machines were left unlocked again, or just baking in the sun until we were permitted to go to bed. If we were lucky, sometimes another kid would be living in the motel and we would try to get them to play with us. One of the longer staying residents was a girl named Daisy somewhere around my age. She was kind of a brat, but I was grateful for her company. I would often knock on her room door and ask her father if she could come out to play. On the day of the story, my brothers and stepfather were gone for some reason or another. This meant I was left alone outside. I eventually decided to try and get Daisy to come play again, and started making my way across the dry, empty parking lot to the room she shared with her father. As I was making my way over, I saw the window curtains move suddenly, as if someone were watching me approach. I paused and waited, just before stepping into the sidewalk right outside of Daisy's room, assuming it was her making her way outside to meet me. Just as I started to second guess what I had witnessed, Daisy's door swung open, and no one stepped out. Nervously, I called out Daisy's name. Someone did come out, but not Daisy. There in the doorway, and quickly approaching me, was a tall, straggly woman with messy and matted blonde hair. Her eyes were blue, which I had only noticed because of how intensely she stared. Her eyes were impossibly wide. Her fast approach scared me, and just as I turned and ran, I felt the woman's tight grip around my waist. I froze, shocked that a stranger would just grab onto me. As our eyes met again, she smiled with a toothy grin and said, "I know you. I know who you are. You're a star. I know you. I know your destiny. You are star. You are destiny. I can show you." She would repeat the same phrase, never seeming to blink, as she began pulling me towards the room she came out of. I remember pulling and trying to yank my arm away from her, but her grip was too tight. I began to panic, not knowing how to make her let go. I started to scream at her, hoping to startle her, but she kept pulling me closer to her room. She suddenly tripped and fell, letting me go. I took the opportunity to try and get away from her, but she recovered quicker than I expected, and this time she grabbed onto my ankle.
Her new hold on me caused me to fall to my stomach. More desperate than ever, I began to scream and flail, trying to cause her to let go of me again, but she just took hold of my other ankle. Realizing I couldn't overpower her, I looked towards my family's room. I was so scared and I couldn't think clearly, and just cried for my mother, hoping she'd hear me from inside the motel room. She never did. I just remember calling out to her, begging her to hear me, to help me. I suddenly felt the sidewalk scraping the skin of my stomach, causing me to realize how much further I was dragged from my motel room. I felt such despair and hopelessness. I began to mentally shut down and give up. Out of nowhere, I heard a man's voice yell out behind me. "Hey, what are you doing?" The woman's grip loosened just then, allowing me to kick her, knocking her back, and finally setting me free. I flipped onto my back and sat up, seeing Daisy's father emerge from the same room the woman came out of. He quickly made his way, trying to comfort me and make sure I was okay. I was so confused and I can't even really remember what he said, but he was just begging me not to tell anyone what happened. He then moved away from me, grabbed the woman, and pushed her back into the motel room. I collected myself and ran to my family's room, where my mom was relaxing and just watching TV. I explained to her what happened, and she stormed out of the room to confront them. My memory is extremely fuzzy at this point. I was just terrified from the events. The cops were called by someone, and I remember looking out of the window of my motel room and seeing the woman in the backseat of a cop car now pulling away. For the last time, our eyes met, causing her to frantically ram herself against the window, screaming. Even though I couldn't hear what she said, I know she was trying to tell me again that she knew me. I don't know what her problem was, but she definitely had a few screws loose. I'm 24, male, and still a virgin. A fact that severely bothers me in recurring phases. And one of those, a couple of months ago, I boldly decided to finally inquire the services of an escort girl. Prostitution is legal in my country, so I wasn't planning on breaking any law. I got in contact with a pretty blonde Russian girl in her early 20s that I found on a website dedicated to private escort girls and their insertions. We decided to meet a couple of days later. She appeared quite short-spoken, almost blank, but I figured that was just a habit you'd evolve in that line of work. If I had to handle lusting guys on an everyday basis, I'd probably be like that too. I took that particular day off from my pretty stuffed work plan and drove to the nearest big city where we arranged to meet. See, I live in a semi-rural student town where I couldn't really find anyone to my liking. It took me a good 2-hour train drive to get to the town, which I really wasn't that familiar with. Strangely enough, she told me that I would only get to her address a couple of hours before the date, for reasons that I couldn't really follow. So here I was in this big city, pretty lost, and almost 2 hours before my date. I had noticed that my phone battery was almost dead, so I frantically texted my date that I would need the address this minute if she still wanted things to happen. I turned off my phone and restarted it every 10 minutes to check for further messages, yet I didn't get any. The coward in me was satisfied. I'd have enough reasons to back up from this insane plan and just drive home. But before I finished that thought, she then messaged me with the address, which luckily wasn't that far off from the main train station. I started to reluctantly walk towards that location, checking my phone with Google Maps for every turn. After about 10 minutes, I arrived at my destination, according to my phone, but I wasn't really sure on where to go from here. There was a turn into some kind of back alley, an apartment, so I figured that I had to go there. To tell you the truth, I was beginning to sweat bullets at this point. I was beginning to slightly shake. I definitely wasn't ready and felt very uncomfortable. I still had 40 minutes before the appointed time, and so I decided to sort of roam the area before I would note my date.
I must have looked like a madman, or as if I had just committed a murder. I walked around the area in circles about 2 times, and then notified the girl. I was being told that I had to get myself a room in a motel that was in that very alley after another left turn, and that she would then go to the respective room after I told her my number. I was relieved. I'm a student. I only had just about the money for the services that she was offering. I surely didn't have the money to pay for some extra rooms. So I was already on my way back, 5 minutes in, texting her that I'm truly sorry for the misunderstanding and that I didn't bring any extra cash for motel rooms. Yet she stopped me dead in my tracks and told me that the room was already calculated in her services. Oh, fuck me. Well, I went back and I made that additional left turn, and there it was. Some 2-story cubicle form motel hidden in the midst of the other buildings surrounding it. It appeared very weird, as if it wouldn't belong here or was just randomly dropped at this place. I reluctantly approached it, even though I was beginning to get annoyed. All I wanted was a friendly person to discreetly help me in this once-in-a-lifetime step, and now it seemed that I had to deal with some rundown whorehouse clerk who would be in the perfect knowledge that I was here because I wanted to pay for sex. The door of the building was open, and there seemed to be some kind of counter. Yet the building didn't seem like something you would just walk inside like a customer. So I told my date my doubts, but she insisted. I waited for some time, and then suddenly a man appeared. He guided a minor-looking girl into that building. It was only after the whole incident that I realized the implications of this. I guess I thought she was his family, but she wasn't even in the same ethnic group. I inquired about a room, and his pupils enlarged. He looked scrawny, nervous, and kind of out of it. As you can imagine hearing this, you might recognize these red flags instantly. But given the fact that I was so scared that I felt like a bag of nerves, my guard was severely lowered. Also, I'm a semi-big and muscular guy, so I'm not necessarily used to feeling physically threatened. The reason that I'm a virgin isn't my looks. I'm antisocial. Weirdly enough, he told me that unfortunately, all the rooms were occupied at the moment. I wrote my date just that, and was told that I should wait a second. Just 5 minutes after that, she texted me that she was now in the process of making herself nice for me, and that I was supposed to go up to the 2nd story and knock at door 2. And so I did. I entered the building. The man from before was not there. Nobody seemed to be there. My first impression was that it looked weirdly sterile, bright one-sided color patterns. I hesitantly walked up the stairs that were directly next to the entrance, step by step. It was dead silent. If all the rooms were in fact occupied at that moment, they sure were a silent bunch. I knocked at the door. It took suspiciously long for the person to open the door, but she was telling me that she was still prepping herself up after all. I heard her approaching the door and some kind of noise. Some clicking sound, or the sound of something closing. She finally opened the door, and to my surprise, there didn't stand the attractive 20-something Russian girl that I texted with, but some ugly, stocky, at least 50-year-old hag with leather-like skin. Before I even comprehended the situation, I had already stepped inside of the room out of reflex, and I noticed the door closing behind me. Fight or flight then kicked in, even though I didn't feel any particular danger coming from that person. She tried to lure me inside of the room with those expressionless eyes, the dead friendliness of a lizard. I must have stuttered like an idiot trying to find a way out. I don't exactly remember what I told her. I was giving her some bullshit excuse on why I needed to leave for a second, again promising that I'd be back ASAP, and I noticed that she was hardly able to comprehend full sentences in the native language, so I just made my best attempt of giving a reassuring hand gesture, then pointing to the door and said 5 minutes, and then immediately left without waiting for her reaction. I practically ran down the stairs, arrived at the 1st floor,
And then out of nowhere, the same scrawny pimp from before then creeped upon me from behind and asked me if I made any progress in finding my date. Without stopping, I just grabbed the door handle and I told him that unfortunately, progress has not been made, and then left the building, speed walking out of that godforsaken place. I texted her once again to confirm that I didn't just confuse the room. I didn't. After I confronted her and told her that I wasn't going to get scammed, I expected to get something along the lines of, "You have to pay me, or my protectors will do such and such in return." But instead, I got no reply at all. I don't know what I walked into that day. Maybe it wasn't even that insidious. Maybe I was just scammed, which is frankly bad enough, but the whole thing gave me the creeps. Friendly piece of advice: if you want to solicit adult services, pay reasonable prices, and don't ever enter any fucking motels.
I'm a woman, and looking back at the story, I recognize everything I did wrong and am horrified, but it's a good warning. I am generally a very skeptical, aware person, lock my car doors right after I get in, trust gut feelings, and don't talk on my phone while walking, etc. I'm shocked by how off guard this caught me. Last week I was traveling to Phoenix on business and stayed in an embassy suite. Nice hotel, stayed there lots of times without problems. I have noticed it is pretty lightly staffed, but no issues. At 6:45 in the morning, my hotel room phone rang. I answered, thinking it must be the front desk, and the person on the other end says, "Hi, is this Jenny?" I said yes, and had the TV on in the background, so couldn't hear him, so I said, "Hang on a second," and muted it. He then said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Are you having a meeting? Am I interrupting?" "No, it's just the TV. Can I help you?" First, let me just tell you, this guy was extremely suave, charming, and disarming. Suave, but not in a slimy way, just totally friendly and nice. Long story short, he goes down this whole path of saying, "You aren't going to believe who this is. It's a blast from the past. Do you know who this is?" Super fun and playful, like a friend would be if they were calling you out of the blue. I do a lot of work in Phoenix and have for many years, and I changed my cell phone number about a year ago. So while it would be incredibly odd for someone to call me at the hotel, I really was trying to rack my brain and figure out who might have heard I was in town and wanted to get in touch. Finally, I told him I didn't know who he was and he'd have to tell me. "Okay, I'll tell you, but you have to guess a city first. Think of a time you met someone in another city, had a great time, and never saw them again. Someone you got a little crazy with." Just to get things moving, I guess Cleveland. I did go to Cleveland on business about 8 years ago, but I didn't do anything crazy there. "Yep, Cleveland." "No, I still don't know who this is." "Think of a Cleveland Browns player you met and had a really good time with." At this point, I clearly know the call isn't for me, and I say definitively, "No, I don't think so." In response, he says, "Oh my goodness, do I have the wrong Jenny? Is this Jenny Miller?" "Nope, wrong person." So he, in a very friendly and engaging way, tells me, "I called the front desk and they must have just been going down the room list and connected me to the wrong Jenny. Well, since I'll never meet you in person, I'll tell you, I met this girl in Cleveland about 2 years ago, and we were both married, but we just had an awesome time, and it was all about the sex. She drunk texted me 2 weeks ago, and she told me she was going to be in town, and I thought I'd call her and surprise her." I kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, interesting. Well, good luck." He, again charmingly, starts to flirt with me. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was moving quickly and was something along the lines of, "Sounds like you had a crazy time in Cleveland too. Well, since I'll never meet you in person." By the way, creepy that he repeated this twice. It stood out to me. "Let me ask you, are you as pretty as you sound?" Then he described himself and asked me, which I very foolishly told him my age, city I'm from, and that I'm married. He then says, "Hey, tell me what happened for you in Cleveland." At that point, I finally wised up and said, "I'm not going to continue this conversation," at which point he promptly hung up. I had about 30 minutes until I needed to leave and felt very unsettled as I reflected on the call. How did he get patched through to my room without my full name, but knowing my first? Obviously, he somehow requested to be connected to my name and made up a story about knowing the last name, maybe. Did he possibly know my room number? Was he lurking and waiting for me? I waited until I saw another woman go to the elevator and jumped out of my room behind her so I wouldn't be alone. At the front desk, I was telling the manager very briefly about it to try to get to the bottom of how they got through to my room, and another woman standing nearby said, "Did someone call your room looking for Sarah Miller?" I said, "No, he called looking for Jenny Miller. My name is Jenny." And then she said, "I had a guy call my room looking for Sarah Miller, and my name is Sarah. I was asleep and he just said really cheerfully, 'Best wake-up call ever.' But I was so disoriented I didn't keep talking to him." The manager, who was the only one working the desk, sort of acknowledged he had some calls come in, but sort of brushed it off and moved on to the next person. So I didn't get to the bottom of that, which, reflecting on it, I should have pushed much harder and may call and do so, but it was all moving really fast. Okay, so pretty creepy, right? Totally disarming personality, disarmed me by doing it in the morning instead of the evening, knew my name, called a hotel phone, got me to acknowledge I was alone, made me pick a city and then made a tie to it, made himself sound like a cool football player even though he clearly wasn't. All kinds of creepy stuff. Here's my question. What was this guy going for? I can only think of a couple of options. One, trying to get someone to talk dirty on the phone for some jollies. Least creepy of the options, but I feel like he didn't move it that way quickly enough and wasn't explicit enough to make that the goal. Or two, I really got the vibe that he was trying to find someone that would be willing to meet him in person. I felt like if I'd continued the conversation, it was going towards, "Hey, I was trying to call Jenny Miller, but you sound really fun and cute. Would you want to meet for a drink?" Who knows what his or his buddy's intentions would be? Kidnapping? Seems over the top, but hey, it happens. And maybe just a lonely guy looking for a date. I googled and found no similar stories. Maybe I googled the wrong thing. I did find the front desk scam where they pose as the front desk and try to get your credit card number, but nothing like this. I am generally no slouch when it comes to personal security, and it freaks me out how easily I was put into friendly mode instead of skeptical mode here. My friends have been shocked when I told them the story and said if anyone was going to fall for it, I'd be the last person they would think. I'm still trying to figure out what this guy might have been after. This happened in the summer, and I believe I was about 12 at the time. I was staying in a hotel in a fairly large city with my mom and my younger brother. We were visiting our extended family, but chose not to stay in their house. My brother is younger than me by a decent amount, so I was usually told to keep an eye on him. On the day we arrived, my mom told me to do just that while she checked us in and received our room card. So my brother and I sat down on a couch in the lobby and relaxed a little bit. While we were sitting, a man in about his mid-40s walked into the hotel. The couch was facing the hotel doors, so I got a good look at him. I remember that he was very average-looking. Describing his features and details could generate several different images. The guy comes in and sits on the couch opposite ours. I didn't think anything of it until I realized that he didn't go up to the counter first. He just came in and sat down. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. I thought that he might have followed us in. Thankfully, my mom called us over and told us that our room was ready. We left the lobby and went to our room. Shortly after, we left the hotel to go meet family. I forgot about the man for the rest of the day. We returned at about 7, and my mom told us that we could go swimming in the hotel pool. We all went to our rooms, changed, and went to the pool. A few minutes after we got into the water, the same man from before walked in and sat down. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, so he definitely wasn't going swimming. Again, we didn't think much of it, until I could see that my mom was visibly worried. She pointed him out to me and said that if he didn't leave within 5 minutes, we needed to go back to our rooms. 5 minutes passed and he was still there, so we got our things and left. By then, it was close to 8. We had brought a rented movie to watch, so we planned to watch that and go straight to bed. I noticed that my mom was a little on edge because of the man watching us, and I got a little more worried myself too. Halfway through the movie, my mom got up to get in the shower. While she was in there, someone knocked on the door and said, "Housekeeping," in a high-pitched voice. I thought it was weird that the cleaning staff would come this late, but we needed another towel, so I answered the door. I wish I hadn't been so stupid. It was the creepy man. He gave me a smile and a little wave. I just stood there, kinda motionless. My mind automatically went to the worst possible situation. Kidnapping, torture, etc. I heard the water in the shower turn off. He stood there as well for a moment, and then he spoke. "How was your swim?" At that moment, my mom came out of the shower, saw the man at the door, pulled me back, and slammed the door. She locked it, then she called the front desk from our hotel phone to report the guy. I told her to just call the police, but she didn't listen. She then requested we switch rooms. I then heard footsteps stomping down the hallway away from our room. Thankfully, the guy had left. After that, we switched hotel rooms and didn't see the guy again during our stay. It all started when I woke up to the sound of someone hammering on my apartment door. That was the first fright I got that night, heart pounding in my chest as I grabbed the bat I kept under my bed and headed towards the door. First thing I do is look through the peephole to make sure it's not anyone sketchy, but I'm greeted by the sight of one of my neighbors. She looks terrified. She's covered in blood, and I can see just through the peephole that her face is a mess. I open up the door, she runs inside and immediately says, "You gotta get me out of here. My boyfriend's trying to kill me." I start to ask her what happened, and she says something like, "There's no time. Just please get me out of here. I swear to God, he'll kill you too for just helping me." That was what sent me into a straight-up panic, because if a guy was willing to beat his girlfriend up that badly, Lord knows that he'd be willing to put me in the ground. I just grabbed my car keys, ran downstairs with the girl following close behind, jumped into my car, then took off into the night. I remember asking her if she had anywhere I could take her, like a friend's or a relative's or something. She said no, and the best thing for us to do would be to drive to a motel so she could call the cops from there. So that's exactly what I did. I drove us to a motel and booked us a room. The clerk was obviously just as concerned as I was, but all it took was to explain that her boyfriend had tried to off her, and they were like, "Geez, make sure you guys call the cops at least." The girl, whose name I didn't know at that point, I just knew she was a neighbor, said that she'd go up to the room and call them, then asked me to get her some ice from the ice machine so she could deal with the swelling on her face. When I got to the room, she said the cops would be there ASAP, took the ice, put it on her face, then just burst into tears. I tried my best to reassure her, telling her she was safe and stuff. Then when she finally calmed down, I asked her what actually happened back at her apartment. She told me her boyfriend was abusive and that she'd been planning on leaving for a while, but that night was the night she'd finally got the courage together to announce it to him. She said he walked into their bedroom to find her packing a bag, and not long after that, everything went to chaos. She started helping herself to the little bottle of liquor from the minibar, but not after promising she'd pay me back for them once everything had blown over. I had no reason to disbelieve her at the time. I mean, I felt like we had a kind of bond established already, but I abstained because I thought I'd be driving back to the apartment pretty soon. I asked her if she was good to wait on her own while the cops drove out to her, but she asked me if I'd stay to keep her safe. She then made the point that if her boyfriend found the blood on my apartment door, she assured me that she'd left some on there while hammering on it, that he'd know she'd been there and he'd try to attack me, or worse. I'll be honest, I thought it was a pretty good point at the time. I hadn't seen the blood myself, but she was so covered in it that I believed her when she said that there was some on my door. Anyway, about an hour goes by and the cops still haven't showed up, and the motel rooms were arranged in a horseshoe shape, so we'd have seen them rolling into the parking lot if they had. I asked her to call them back to see what was going on, because obviously it was a really urgent situation, and I know that there was basically no way for the boyfriend in finding us, but I was still really paranoid that he would somehow. That's when the inconsistencies started, because she gave me some lame duck of a reply like, "I'm sure they'll be here soon." If that was me, I'd have called 911 again if they hadn't shown up within like 10 minutes. So what was she so calm about that she was just cool with waiting for them for like an hour at that point? I put it down to booze, and at that point I was okay with waiting too. It wasn't like I had anywhere to be. I sure couldn't just go back to my apartment with that psycho supposedly just a few doors down. But that's also about the same time that I started checking out the amount of blood on her nightshirt. She had like an oversized t-shirt and girl boxers on, and like I said earlier, they were drenched with blood, but also with some blood splattered too, like little spots here and there. She had this cut over her eye, and she had a nasty busted lip, but it looked like way too much blood for just those small wounds. So I asked her if she had any other kind of injuries, like an abdominal wound of some kind that might account for all the blood on her. She said no, and that it was all from the busted lip in her eye. And immediately I start smelling nonsense. I asked her again what exactly had happened back at the apartment, and she started getting weirdly defensive about what she told me. I was starting to think it wasn't quite the abusive spouse kind of story that she told me the first time around, but I had no inkling of what was really going on. That being said, I was getting tired of waiting for the cops to show, so I decided to call them back myself. All I had on me was my wallet, my phone, and my car keys, the only three things I'd had time to stuff into the pockets of my shorts before fleeing the apartment. But when I take my phone out to call the cops, she says something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" I state the obvious, that I'm about to call the cops back, and she's like, "Don't." I don't know if it was the way she was looking at me, the way she spoke, or the way she sort of tensed up when I told her that I was about to do that, but the mood in the room just shifted completely. I asked her why not, then just went right back to dialing 911. But by the time the operator spoke down the line, I looked up and saw she had a knife in her hand. She just said, "Hang up, now." So I did. I never had a knife pulled on me at that point, and I can't overstate how terrifying it was. It wasn't even just the knife either. It was the overwhelming creepy sensation of knowing that all wasn't what it seemed. I wasn't hiding from the threat. I was with the threat. I'll be honest here. I basically begged her not to hurt me, and to my relief, she said she wouldn't as long as I drove her to the Canadian border. Given this was in Detroit, the border isn't all that far, but I didn't want to catch charges for aiding and abetting or whatever, so I knew I had to think of something to stop that from happening. It's not like I knew I couldn't tell the cops that I'd been threatened or whatever, but I also knew that the longer I spent in this girl's company, the more chances I'd have of being stabbed. So, I tell the girl that I'd drive her to the border, but that I needed to get something to eat first. I play it like I wanted to stop somewhere on the way, knowing she'd reason me down to getting something delivered from a 24-hour joint. She also stated that she'd be the one going down to pick the food up, as she didn't want me having the chance to sound the alarm. That's where she messed up, because she didn't seem to realize, to my infinite relief, that I could order from DoorDash and put something in the notes about needing the cops called to the motel. My whole plan hinged on there being a driver around that late at night, but thank God there was, and I was even able to show her the order without bringing up the notes section that mentioned needing 911 called to the motel. And the cops played it perfectly too. They showed up without any lights and sirens on, didn't park in the lot, walked up to the motel room without being spotted from the window, then just knocked on the door like they were a delivery driver. She walks over, opens up the door, then boom, they had a gun and a taser drawn on her before she even knew what was happening. She had the knife tucked into the back of her girl boxers, but the cops were wise to her drawing on them, and she hit the floor hard after they hit her with the taser. Turned out they'd been looking for her because, get this, she was the abusive partner who'd stabbed her boyfriend almost to death before finding some poor schmuck, i.e. me, to drive her to the border. Dude almost bled to death in their apartment but managed to crawl to another neighbor's place to get help. You should have seen the amount of blood in the hallway when I got back to my apartment building, and the whole place was crawling with cops and forensic gear. I thought I might be able to drive over to a friend's place to stay the night, contaminating a crime scene or whatever, but they had this section of the corridor closed off so I could actually get into where I lived. The cops came to my apartment in the morning to take my statement down and to fill me in on what they thought had happened. That's how I found out exactly what the deal was. It was 100% the craziest, most frightening thing that's ever happened to me, ever in my life. And just the fact that I was part of it seems completely surreal to me. But the thing that sticks with me is how easily I swallowed her nonsense story at first. How I thought it was helping someone I knew, someone I could trust, when in reality, one wrong move, and I might not actually be around to tell you this.